5 years of unanswered letters. 5 years of waiting by the same weathered fence post, watching dust devils dance across the Kansas prairie. Eleanor Price had become Silver Creek's most pitied soul, the Boston schoolteacher who refused to believe her cowboy was gone. But when a stranger with storm-gray eyes rode into town carrying a sealed envelope, everything she thought she knew about love, loss, and Luke Callahan would shatter like glass. Some truths arrive too late. Some arrive exactly when they're meant to. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled across the world. The Kansas wind had a way of carrying ghosts. Eleanor Price had learned this truth over 5 long years of standing at the fence line, her fingers wrapped around letters that had gone yellow at the edges, her eyes scanning a horizon that never gave back what it had taken. The prairie stretched endlessly before her, a sea of tall grass that whispered secrets in a language she'd spent half a decade trying to understand. Somewhere out there, beyond the curve of the earth, where the sun bled crimson every evening, was the answer to the question that had hollowed out her heart. Why had Luke Callahan stopped writing? The fence post had become her altar, her confessional, her cross. Every evening, as the light failed and Silver Creek settled into its dusty slumber, Eleanor would walk the quarter-mile from her small schoolhouse to this exact spot. Her feet had worn a path through the prairie grass, a thin line of testimony to her faithfulness. The townspeople had stopped asking if she was well. They simply nodded as she passed, their eyes full of that terrible mixture of sympathy and judgment that people reserve for those who won't release the dead. But Luke wasn't dead. He couldn't be. Eleanor would have felt it, wouldn't she? The tearing of that invisible thread that bound one soul to another? She clutched the last letter closer to her chest, though she'd long ago memorized every loop and slant of his handwriting. My dearest Eleanor, the war is ending, thank God, and all his angels. I've seen things no man should see, done things no man should have to do. But through it all, your face has been my compass, your letters my salvation. I'm coming home, my love. Not to Boston. I can't go back to that life of parlors and propriety. I'm heading west to Kansas territory. There's land there, Eleanor, more land than a man can dream of. Land where we can build something true and lasting. Wait for me. I'll send for you as soon as I've staked our claim. By Christmas, we'll be together under our own roof, watching our own sunset. Wait for me, my darling girl. Wait for me. Yours eternally, Luke. That had been in 1872, written from some blood-soaked field in Virginia that Eleanor couldn't find on any map she'd consulted. Christmas had come and gone, then another, and another. 5 Christmases without Luke, without word, without anything but the screaming silence of unanswered letters. She'd written every week at first, sending her letters to Fort Leavenworth with desperate pleas for them to forward her correspondence to Lucas Callahan, formerly of the 5th Kansas Volunteer Cavalry. The replies, when they came at all, were bureaucratic and unhelpful. Records were incomplete. Many men had scattered after the war. Had she tried the Veterans Bureau? Had she considered that perhaps Mr. Callahan had simply moved on? Moved on. As if love were a train station you could simply depart from when the schedule suited you. Eleanor had left Boston in the spring of 1874, her mother's protests ringing in her ears. You're chasing a phantom, Eleanor. He's forgotten you, or worse, he's dead and you're too stubborn to admit it. Stay here. Marry Mr. Pemberton. He's a good man, a wealthy man. You'll want for nothing. But Eleanor had wanted everything. Everything that Luke had promised in his letters. The adventure, the freedom, the wild beauty of a land untamed by Boston's suffocating social conventions. She'd boarded a train with one trunk and a heart full of determination, telling herself that if she could just get to Kansas, just get closer to where Luke had gone, somehow the universe would bring them together. Silver Creek had been little more than a collection of crude buildings when she'd arrived. The town had needed a school teacher, and Eleanor had needed a purpose while she searched. She'd taken the position, thinking it temporary. Now, 3 years later, she'd become part of the landscape, as permanent and weathered as the fence posts she visited each evening. The sun was sinking now, painting the underbelly of the clouds in shades of copper and gold. Eleanor's shadow stretched long across the prairie grass, a thin specter of the woman she'd once been. In Boston, she'd been vivacious, quick to laugh, her dark hair always perfectly coiffed, her dresses the envy of her social circle. Now her hair was pulled into a simple bun, strands escaping in the constant wind. Her dresses were practical calico, made for dusty schoolrooms and prairie walks. Her hands, once soft and pale, bore the calluses of frontier life. "Still waiting, Miss Price?" The voice startled her, though it shouldn't have. Martha Henderson approached along the fence line, her own shawl wrapped tight against the evening chill. Martha ran the boarding house where Eleanor took her meals, a woman of 40 with kind eyes and an unfortunate tendency toward pity. "Just watching the sunset," Eleanor replied, the same lie she'd told 1,000 times. "That's a coincidence. The sunset happens to occur in the exact same spot every evening, and you just happen to be here watching it." Martha's tone was gentle, but firm. "Eleanor, honey, it's been 5 years." "I'm aware of how time works, Martha." "Are you?" The older woman moved to stand beside her, both of them facing west. "Because from where I stand, you're stuck in 1872, waiting for a man who—" "Don't say it!" Eleanor's voice was sharp as a knife's edge. "Don't you dare say he's not coming. You don't know that. No one knows that." Martha sighed, the sound lost in the prairie wind. "I know you've written 62 letters to every fort, garrison, and settlement office between here and Virginia. I know you've placed advertisements in newspapers from Kansas City to Denver. I know you've spent every spare penny you have trying to find a man who clearly doesn't want to be found. He wanted to be found. Something happened to him, something that prevents him from writing, or something that prevents him from caring." Martha's words landed like stones in still water. "Forgive me for speaking plain, but there are only so many explanations, Eleanor. Either he's dead, or he's decided he doesn't want what he promised you. Either way, standing at this fence every evening won't change reality." Eleanor turned to face her friend, her eyes burning with unshed tears and fierce determination. "What would you have me do, Martha? Forget him? Pretend that the best year of my life, those months when his letters arrived like clockwork, when I could feel his love across all those miles, pretend that meant nothing? I'd have you live, girl. I'd have you stop punishing yourself for a man's broken promises." "They weren't broken, not by him," Eleanor's voice cracked. "If he could write, he would. I know it in my bones. Something happened, something terrible, and I'm the only person in this world who's still looking for answers." Martha reached out and squeezed Eleanor's hand. "The town social is Saturday night. Samuel Morrison has asked after you 3 times. He's a good man, Eleanor. Solid. He owns the feed store outright, no debt. He'd be a fine husband." "I already have a husband in my heart." "Hearts can change, honey. They're supposed to. It's called healing." But Eleanor didn't want to heal. Healing meant forgetting, and forgetting meant betraying the love she'd carried across 1,000 miles. She gently pulled her hand from Martha's grasp and returned her gaze to the horizon, where the last sliver of sun was disappearing. "I appreciate your concern, truly. But I need you to understand something, Martha. Every person in this town has given up on Luke Callahan. Even the Army has given up on him. I'm the last person on this earth who still believes in him, who still holds space for his return. If I give up too, then he's truly gone. And I'm not ready for that. I don't know if I'll ever be ready for that." Martha was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "All right, Eleanor, all right, but promise me you'll come to supper. I made chicken and dumplings, and Reverend Michaels will be there. He asked if you might help organize the church's new library, said you had the best organizational mind he'd ever encountered." Despite everything, Eleanor felt a small smile tug at her lips. "The Reverend is kind to say so. Yes, I'll come. Give me a few more minutes?" "Don't stay out too long. There's weather coming in from the north." Martha patted her shoulder and turned back toward town, her figure growing smaller against the darkening landscape. Alone again, Eleanor unfolded Luke's last letter, though she didn't need to read it. The words were carved into her memory, branded onto her soul. She traced the lines of his signature with one finger, imagining his hand forming those letters, imagining him thinking of her as he wrote. "Where are you?" she whispered to the wind. "What happened to you, my love?" The prairie offered no answer, just the endless susurration of grass and the first cold drops of rain beginning to fall. The next morning dawned gray and sullen, the kind of day that made students restless and teachers weary before lessons even began. Eleanor arrived at the schoolhouse early, as she always did, to light the stove and prepare the day's lessons. The single-room building sat at the edge of Silver Creek, a simple structure of raw timber and good intentions. Inside, rows of mismatched desks faced a slate board that Eleanor had bullied the town council into purchasing last year. She was writing arithmetic problems on the board when the door opened, admitting a gust of cold air and Tommy Morrison, the feed store owner's 8-year-old nephew. "Morning, Miss Price." The boy's enthusiasm was infectious, even on gray days. He clutched a slate and a primer that was falling apart from use. "Good morning, Tommy. You're early today." "Uncle Samuel said I could come ahead if I finished my chores quick." The boy settled into his usual desk in the front row. "Miss Price, is it true you came all the way from Boston?" Eleanor smiled, accustomed to his endless questions. "It is indeed." "Why'd you leave? Uncle Samuel says Boston is the finest city in America." "Boston is fine," Eleanor allowed, moving to stoke the fire. "But sometimes a person needs to find their own place in the world. Sometimes that means leaving fine cities behind." "Were you looking for something?" The innocent question struck deeper than the boy could know. Eleanor paused, poker in hand, staring into the flames. "Yes, Tommy. I suppose I was." "Did you find it?" "I'm still looking." Other students began arriving, the Gunderson twins, perpetually muddy, Sarah Beth Crawford, who read at twice the level of her peers, little Jimmy Watts, who struggled with letters but could calculate sums faster than Eleanor herself. By 9 o'clock, all 15 of her pupils were seated, and Eleanor had pushed thoughts of Luke and letters and fence posts to the back of her mind. Teaching was the one thing that made her feel purposeful, that reminded her she was more than just the town's tragic figure. These children needed her, and she poured into them all the love and energy she'd once imagined giving to her own children, the children she and Luke would have had. They were midway through a geography lesson, Eleanor pointing out the territories and states on her worn map, when the sound of thunder rolled across the plains. But it wasn't thunder. It was too rhythmic, too sustained. The students began to murmur, pressing toward the windows. "It's cattle, Miss Price," Tommy shouted. "A whole drive coming through." Eleanor moved to the window and saw it. A river of livestock flowing toward Silver Creek, thousands of head of cattle churning up the prairie in a storm of hooves and dust. Flanking them were riders, cowboys on horseback guiding the herd with practiced precision. Even from a distance, Eleanor could feel the raw power of it, the barely controlled chaos of moving so many animals across open land. "Children, back to your seats," she said, though she couldn't pull her own eyes from the spectacle. Cattle drives had become less common as railroads pushed west, but they still came through occasionally, bringing noise and excitement and sometimes trouble to quiet frontier towns. Sarah Beth Crawford raised her hand. "Miss Price, my pa says when the drives come through, we're supposed to stay indoors. He says the cowboys get rowdy." "Your father is wise," Eleanor replied. "The men who work these drives are away from civilization for months at a time. When they reach a town, they often celebrate excessively. We'll dismiss early today, and I want each of you to go straight home. No dawdling, no exploring. Understood?" A chorus of "Yes, Miss Price" answered her, though the excitement in the air was palpable. Cowboys meant stories, meant danger and adventure, meant a break from the monotony of prairie life. Eleanor dismissed the students at noon and watched to ensure each made it safely toward their homes. Then she stood in the schoolhouse doorway, watching as the first riders reached the outskirts of town. They were weather-beaten men, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats, their clothes stained with months of trail dust. They moved with the easy confidence of those who'd spent more time in saddles than in chairs. She should go to Martha's boarding house. She should follow her own advice and stay indoors. But something held her there, watching as the drive flowed past like a river finding its course. Perhaps it was simply the break in routine, or perhaps it was something deeper. A sense that today, this day of all days, something was going to shift. "Ma'am, you'll want to step back from the street." The voice came from directly beside her, and Eleanor startled. She'd been so focused on the herd that she hadn't noticed the rider who'd approached on foot, leading his horse. He was tall, lean in the way of men who burned energy faster than they could consume it. His hat was pushed back enough for her to see his face, weathered and tanned, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into sun and distance. Those eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, and they held a peculiar combination of wariness and kindness. "I'm quite all right, thank you," Eleanor said, not moving. "Respectfully, ma'am, you're not." He gestured toward the street where dust hung thick as fog. "When the stragglers come through, they'll be running hard to catch up. You don't want to be standing this close." As if to punctuate his words, a group of younger cattle broke from the main herd, panicked by something Eleanor couldn't see. They thundered directly toward the schoolhouse, and suddenly the cowboy's hand was on her elbow, pulling her back just as the animals careened past, missing the porch by mere feet. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. "Thank you," she managed, her voice shaky. "Just doing what's decent." He released her arm immediately, maintaining a respectful distance. "Name's Cole Barrett. I scout for the drive, ride ahead, find water, and good bedding ground. Check for trouble." "Eleanor Price. I teach here." She smoothed her skirts, trying to regain her composure. "How long will the drive be staying?" 3, maybe 4 days. The herd needs rest, and we've got some lame animals that need tending. The trail boss is negotiating with your mayor now for grazing rights on the land north of town." Cole's gray eyes assessed her with an intensity that made Eleanor uncomfortable. "If you don't mind my asking, ma'am, you seem a touch more refined than most frontier school teachers. You're not from around here." "Boston," Eleanor said shortly, unused to such direct conversation with strangers. "I came west 3 years ago." "Long way to travel for a teaching position." "I had my reasons." Something in her tone must have warned him off, because Cole simply nodded and touched the brim of his hat. "Well, Miss Price, I'll let you get on with your day. Just remember what I said about staying clear of the streets while the cattle are moving. These animals have been on the trail for 2 months. They're tired and unpredictable." He turned to leave, and Eleanor surprised herself by speaking again. "Mr. Barrett, in your scouting, I imagine you cover a great deal of territory." He paused, looking back at her. "Yes, ma'am. I've been from Texas to Montana and just about everywhere between." "Do you keep track of the people you encounter, the other cowboys, the settlers?" Cole's expression shifted, became more cautious. "Depends on the people, I suppose. Why do you ask?" Eleanor hesitated. She'd asked this question of countless trailhands over the years, each time hoping for a different answer. "I'm looking for someone. A man named Luke Callahan. He was in the 5th Kansas Volunteer Cavalry during the war. He wrote to me in 1872 saying he was heading to Kansas Territory to stake a claim. I haven't heard from him since." The change in Cole Barrett's face was subtle but unmistakable, a flicker of something Eleanor couldn't quite identify. Recognition? Pity? "Callahan," he repeated slowly. "Luke Callahan." Eleanor's breath caught. "You know him. You've heard the name." "I've heard it," Cole said carefully. "It's not uncommon in these parts." "But have you met him? Spoken with him?" Eleanor stepped forward, her restraint crumbling. "Please, if you know anything at all—" "Miss Price." Cole's voice was gentle but firm. "I've crossed paths with a lot of men over the years. Some names stick, some don't. Luke Callahan is a name I've heard, but I can't say for certain I've met the man you're looking for. Men change their names out here sometimes. Start fresh." "He wouldn't." Eleanor's certainty was absolute. Luke wouldn't change his name. He wouldn't abandon his identity or his promises. Cole was quiet for a moment, studying her with those storm-gray eyes. "How long's it been since you heard from him?" 5 years. She saw the pity then, clear and unvarnished, and it ignited something fierce in her chest. "Don't," she said sharply. "Don't look at me like that. Don't stand there thinking what everyone in this town thinks, that I'm pathetic, that I'm chasing ghosts, that I should just give up and marry the feed store owner and settle for a life I never wanted. That's not what I was thinking, ma'am." "Then what were you thinking?" Cole adjusted his hat, looking uncomfortable. "I was thinking that you must have loved him something fierce to still be looking after all this time. And I was thinking that Luke Callahan, whoever he is either the luckiest man alive or the damnedest fool, depending on whether he knows what he's got waiting for him. The unexpected validation brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have spoken so harshly. It's just, you don't need to explain, Miss Price. Loyalty's nothing to apologize for. He shifted his weight, clearly wanting to depart, but too polite to simply walk away. I'll keep my ears open. If I hear anything about a Luke Callahan fitting your description, I'll let you know before we move on. Thank you, Mr. Barrett. That's kind of you. He nodded and swung back into his saddle with practiced ease. As he rode away, Eleanor noticed he turned back once, his gray eyes finding her still standing on the schoolhouse porch, and something in his expression made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. That evening, Eleanor told herself she wouldn't go to the fence. The cattle drive had disrupted everything, filling Silver Creek with noise and activity and strangers. She should stay at the boarding house, should help Martha prepare the extra rooms that would no doubt be let to trail hands looking for real beds and hot meals. But as sunset approached, her feet carried her there anyway, following the path worn smooth by years of faithful waiting. The fence post stood sentinel against the horizon, and Eleanor took her customary position beside it, Luke's letter pressed against her heart. The cattle had been moved to grazing land north of town, but the smell of them still hung in the air, dust and hide and the green scent of disturbed prairie grass. In the distance, Eleanor could see the orange glow of the drive's camp, could hear the faint strains of a harmonica playing a melancholy tune. I met someone today, she whispered to the absent Luke, as she often did during these solitary vigils. A scout named Cole Barrett. He said he'd heard your name. It's not much, but it's more than I've learned in months. Maybe he'll remember something. Maybe he's crossed paths with you without realizing it. The wind picked up, carrying with it the first real cold of autumn. Eleanor wrapped her shawl tighter, watching as stars began to puncture the darkening sky. In Boston, you could barely see the stars. The city lights drowned them out. But here, on the open prairie, they multiplied until the sky seemed more light than darkness, a vast canopy of possibilities. I'm tired, she admitted to the night. I'm so tired of hoping, Luke. Sometimes I think Martha's right, that I should just stop this, that I should accept that you're gone and try to build something resembling a life from what's left. But then I think about giving up, and it feels like betraying everything we promised each other. A sound behind her made Eleanor turn. A figure was approaching through the darkness, a man on foot, moving with careful purpose. Her heart leapt irrationally before common sense asserted itself. The silhouette was wrong, the walk unfamiliar. Miss Price? It was Cole Barrett's voice. Sorry to disturb you. I saw you from the camp and wanted to make sure you were all right. It's not safe to be out alone after dark, not with so many strangers in town. I'm fine, Mr. Barrett. I come here every evening. He moved closer, close enough for her to see his face in the starlight. This is the place, isn't it? The place you wait for him. It wasn't really a question, and Eleanor didn't answer it as one. Is there something you needed? I wanted to apologize if I overstepped this afternoon. Your business is your own, and I had no right to— You didn't overstep, Eleanor interrupted. You were kind. That's rare enough in this world. Cole removed his hat, turning it in his hands. It was a nervous gesture that seemed at odds with his otherwise confident bearing. I did some asking around camp tonight, spoke to some of the older hands who've been working cattle drives for years. 3 men remembered a Luke Callahan. Eleanor's breath stopped. And none of them could say for certain they'd seen him in the last 2 years. The most recent sighting was in Colorado Territory, around 73. Man matching his description was working a mining claim near Central City. Colorado. Eleanor's mind raced. That's not so far. I could write to the mining offices, the claims bureau. Miss Price. Cole's voice was gentle but insistent. The man who reported this said there'd been an accident at that claim. A cave-in. Several miners died. He couldn't say for certain if Callahan was among them because he left the area before the bodies were recovered. The words landed like blows. Eleanor gripped the fence post to steady herself. No, that's not— It's speculation. Without confirmation, without seeing records. You're right, Cole said quietly. It's not proof. But it's information you didn't have before. I thought you'd want to know. Because you think it will make me stop waiting? Eleanor's voice was sharp with pain and anger. Because you think learning he might be dead will somehow release me from this foolish loyalty? No, ma'am. I think you've got a right to the truth, whatever that truth turns out to be. And I think chasing that truth is better than standing at fences wondering. Eleanor turned away from him, facing west once more. The stars blurred as tears finally spilled over. She'd spent 5 years refusing to cry, refusing to grieve, because grieving meant accepting loss. But something in Cole Barrett's matter-of-fact delivery and his refusal to coddle or pity her broke through her defenses. I loved him, she said, her voice cracking. I loved him so much. He made me feel seen in a way no one else ever had. When we met at that veterans benefit in Boston, he was so out of place among all those society people, but he didn't care. He was himself, completely and unapologetically. And he looked at me like I was someone worth knowing, not just worth marrying for my father's connections. Cole said nothing, just stood a respectful distance away, letting her speak. We had 6 months together before he went west. 6 months of letters and stolen moments and plans for a future. 6 months and then silence. Do you know what that does to a person, Mr. Barrett? To have something so beautiful and then have it just stop? With no explanation, no closure, nothing but questions? I can't imagine, Cole said honestly, but I can see what it's done to you, and I can see that you're stronger than anyone gives you credit for, including yourself. Eleanor wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm slowly disappearing, like every day without answers erases a little more of who I used to be. Then maybe it's time to get some answers. Cole stepped closer, his voice taking on a determined edge. There are ways to find out what happened in Colorado. Mining companies keep records. Claims offices document deaths. It'll take time and letters, but it's possible. And once you really know, you can decide what comes next. And if he's dead? Eleanor forced herself to say the word out loud. If I find proof that Luke died in that mine collapse? Then you grieve, Cole said simply. You let yourself feel it and then you keep living. Because that's what people do. They survive things they never thought they could survive. Eleanor studied this strange cowboy who'd appeared in her life like a comet, bright, unexpected, and impossible to ignore. Why do you care, Mr. Barrett? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Cole put his hat back on, the brim shadowing his eyes. No, ma'am, I don't. But I've been where you are, in a different way. I've lost people and spent years not knowing what happened to them. It's a special kind of hell, that not knowing. So if I can help someone else find their answers, seems like the decent thing to do. Who did you lose? My brother, Cole said after a pause. He rode off to join the Confederacy in '61. I never saw him again. Don't know if he died in battle or from disease, or if he just decided to start a new life somewhere. All I know is he's gone, and I spent 10 years looking for him in every stranger's face, listening for his laugh in every crowd. Took me a long time to accept that some questions don't get answered. Eleanor felt the weight of his loss, recognized a kindred spirit in grief. I'm sorry. So am I. But it taught me something important, that you can't live your life in the past, no matter how much you want to. The present keeps happening whether you're paying attention or not. And if you're not careful, you'll wake up one day and realize you've spent so many years looking backward that you missed everything happening around you. The words resonated deep in Eleanor's chest, finding the secret fear she'd carried for so long. She was missing her life. She knew it, even as she couldn't seem to stop herself from waiting, from hoping, from standing at this fence like some prairie prophet waiting for a revelation that might never come. The drive is staying for 3 more days, Cole said. If you want, I can help you write letters to the mining offices in Colorado. I know which ones keep the best records. We might get lucky. Why would you do that? Because you deserve answers, Miss Price. And because I think Luke Callahan, wherever he is, would want someone to look out for you. Cole's voice softened. From what you've told me, he loved you. A man who loves a woman like that wouldn't want her trapped in limbo forever. Eleanor nodded slowly, feeling something shift in her chest. Not hope exactly, but something adjacent to it. Purpose, maybe. Direction. All right, Mr. Barrett, I'd appreciate your help. Cole, he corrected gently, If we're going to be corresponding with mining offices together, seems like we should be on a first-name basis. Then you should call me Eleanor. He smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his whole face, made him look younger and less burdened. Eleanor it is. Meet me at the boarding house tomorrow afternoon. Martha Henderson usually has a parlor where guests can sit and write. I know it well, I live there. Then I'll see you tomorrow. Cole touched his hat brim and turned to go, then paused. Eleanor? Maybe don't come out here alone at night anymore. At least not while the drive's in town. Not everyone's got honorable intentions. I can take care of myself. I don't doubt it. But taking care of yourself also means being smart about risk. Let me walk you back? Eleanor wanted to refuse on principle, but the truth was the prairie did seem darker tonight, more filled with unknown dangers. She nodded, and together they walked back toward Silver Creek, the lights from the boarding house windows guiding them home like lanterns in a storm. Behind them, the fence post stood alone in the darkness, bearing silent witness to the beginning of something new, though neither Eleanor nor Cole could have said exactly what that something was. The next afternoon, Eleanor sat across from Cole in Martha Henderson's best parlor, a small room reserved for guests who needed to conduct business or write important correspondence. Martha had provided them with writing materials, strong coffee, and knowing looks that Eleanor chose to ignore. All right, Cole said, spreading a map across the table. Central City is here, in Colorado Territory. It's one of the larger mining camps, which means they'll have decent record keeping. We should also write to the claims office in Denver. They handle all the death certificates and property transfers for the territory. Eleanor dipped her pen in ink, her hand steady despite the trembling in her chest. What should I say? Keep it factual. Name, approximate year he would have been there, his military service if you know it. That'll help them narrow down records. And include your address here in Silver Creek. Together they composed 3 letters, one to the Central City Mining Association, one to the Colorado Territorial Claims Office, and one to the Veterans Bureau in Denver asking about any benefits claimed or death notices filed for Luke Callahan. Cole dictated from experience, his knowledge of frontier bureaucracy proving invaluable. Now comes the hard part, he said when the letters were sealed and addressed. Waiting. These offices are understaffed and overwhelmed. Could be weeks before we hear anything. Could be months. I've gotten good at waiting, Eleanor said wryly. Cole studied her across the table. Tell me about him. About Luke. If you want to. Why? Because I've been helping you search for a ghost, and I'd like to know who he was when he was alive. Eleanor set down her pen and looked out the window at Silver Creek's dusty main street. He was different from other men I'd known. The boys in Boston were also concerned with appearances, with saying the right things and being seen in the right places. Luke didn't care about any of that. He'd grown up on a farm in Kansas, enlisted at 16, lied about his age, spent 4 years fighting, and when he came home, when he came to Boston for that veterans benefit, he was like something wild trapped in a parlor. How'd you meet? I was serving punch. Eleanor smiled at the memory. It was a charity event my mother had organized, very proper, very tedious. Luke was standing in the corner looking like he wanted to bolt for the door. Our eyes met and he just walked over. Didn't introduce himself properly, didn't ask permission to approach. Just said, "You look as miserable as I feel. Want to escape this circus?" And we did. We slipped out the back door and walked through Boston Gardens for 3 hours, talking about everything and nothing. Sounds like love at first sight. More like recognition at first sight. Eleanor's voice grew soft with remembering. I felt like I'd been waiting my whole life for someone to see past the performance. My mother had trained me so carefully, how to sit, how to speak, how to be decorative and agreeable. Luke looked at me and said, "Tell me something true about yourself. Not something you're supposed to say, something real." So I told him I hated Boston, hated the suffocating social rules, hated the way everyone around me seemed to be playing parts in a play that would never end. And he said, "Then leave. Come west with me." And you almost did. I wanted to. Eleanor's hands twisted together in her lap. But I was young and afraid and too trained in propriety. So I said I'd wait. He'd go first, establish himself, and then send for me. It seemed reasonable at the time. Now it seems like the worst decision I ever made. Cole was quiet for a moment. Eleanor, I have to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. All right. When you think about Luke now, when you picture him in your mind, are you seeing him as he was or as you remember him being? Eleanor frowned. I don't understand the question. We all do it, Cole said gently. When someone's gone, we start editing them in our memories. We smooth away the rough edges, forget the arguments, remember only the best moments. Pretty soon we're in love with a memory, not a person. And that memory doesn't have any flaws, doesn't disappoint us, doesn't change. It stays perfect, and we stay stuck. You think I've turned Luke into some kind of saint in my mind? I think 5 years is a long time, and memory is a tricky thing. Cole leaned forward, his gray eyes serious. I'm not trying to diminish what you felt for him, but I want you to consider the possibility that even if we find him alive, even if he comes walking into Silver Creek tomorrow, he might not be the man you remember. War changes people. The frontier changes people. Time changes people. Eleanor wanted to argue, to insist that love didn't work that way, that she knew Luke's soul and would recognize it anywhere. But something in Cole's words rang with uncomfortable truth. How many times had she reread those letters, polishing the memories until they gleamed? How many times had she imagined their reunion, always perfect, always exactly as she'd dreamed? What if I don't know him anymore? She whispered. What if we find him, and he's become someone completely different? Then you make a new choice, Cole said, based on who you both are now, not who you were 5 years ago. But you can't make any choice until you know the truth. That's what we're doing here, Eleanor. We're finding the truth so you can finally move forward, whatever that looks like. Before Eleanor could respond, Tommy Morrison burst into the parlor, his face flushed with excitement. Miss Price, you gotta come quick. Tommy, what is it? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. There's a woman and a little boy just arrived with the cattle drive, and the woman's awful sick, and they're saying she needs help, and someone said you'd know what to do. Eleanor was on her feet immediately, Cole right behind her. Where are they? At the camp. The trail boss sent me to fetch you. They hurried out of the boarding house and toward the cattle drive's camp at the north end of town. The usual bustle of cowboys and livestock had been interrupted by a cluster of men standing around a covered wagon. As Eleanor approached, they parted to let her through. Inside the wagon lay a woman who couldn't have been more than 30, her face waxy and pale, her breathing shallow. Beside her huddled a boy of perhaps 6 or 7, his eyes huge with fear and exhaustion. Ma'am? The trail boss, a grizzled man named Jim Thornton, stepped forward. We found her 2 days ago, her and the boy. Their wagon had broken down about 20 miles south of here. Her husband died of cholera back in Missouri, and she's been trying to make it to Denver where she's got family, but she's taken sick herself, and we don't know what to do for her. Eleanor climbed into the wagon, pressing her hand to the woman's forehead. Fever blazed beneath her skin. How long has she been like this? She was already feverish when we found her, but she's gotten worse. Won't eat, can barely take water. We need to get her out of this wagon and into a real bed. Eleanor turned to Cole, who'd followed her. Can you help carry her? Where are we taking her? The boarding house. Martha has experience nursing. She'll know what to do. What followed was a flurry of activity. Cole lifted the woman as gently as if she were made of glass, carrying her toward town while Eleanor walked beside him, keeping one hand on the woman's burning forehead. The boy trailed behind, silent and ghost-like, still wearing the same dust-covered clothes he'd probably been wearing for weeks. Martha took one look at the situation and sprang into action, directing them to her best room, sending Tommy's Uncle Samuel to fetch Dr. Pritchard, ordering Eleanor to boil water and gather clean linens. The boarding house transformed into a makeshift hospital, and for the next several hours, Eleanor forgot about letters and lost loves and fence posts, focusing entirely on the immediate crisis before her. It was nearly midnight before Dr. Pritchard emerged from the sick room, his face grave. Eleanor, Cole, and Martha had been waiting in the parlor, the boy curled up asleep in a chair with a blanket tucked around him. How is she? Martha asked. The doctor shook his head slowly. Pneumonia, complicated by malnutrition and exhaustion. I've done what I can, but... He glanced at the sleeping child. Someone should make arrangements for the boy. Is there family? She was trying to reach relatives in Denver, Cole said, but we don't know who they are or how to contact them. Then the boy will need somewhere to stay, at least temporarily. Dr. Pritchard gathered his medical bag. Martha, you know what to do for her. Make her comfortable. I'll check back in the morning, but I don't expect... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. After he left, the three of them sat in heavy silence, watching the boy sleep, each thinking about the cruelty of fate that could leave a child orphaned in the middle of nowhere, dependent on the kindness of strangers. I'll take him, Eleanor heard herself say. Until we can find his family, he can stay with me. Martha looked at her in surprise. Eleanor, honey, you live in a single room in my boarding house. You can't... Then I'll rent a bigger room, or find a house. I can't let him be passed around like an unwanted package. Eleanor stood and walked to where the boy slept, gently brushing his dark hair from his forehead. He needs stability, even if it's temporary. He needs someone to care about him while his world is falling apart. Cole joined her, looking down at the sleeping child. That's a big commitment. So is standing at a fence every night for 5 years, Eleanor said quietly. At least this commitment has a purpose. The next morning, the boy's mother died without regaining consciousness. Eleanor was there when it happened, holding the woman's hand, whispering promises that her son would be cared for, that he wouldn't be left alone in the world. When it was over, she sat for a long time in the silent room, thinking about how quickly everything could change, how death could arrive without warning or mercy. The boy's name, they learned from papers in the wagon, was Thomas Henry Morrison, though he insisted everyone call him Henry. He was 7 years old, and until 2 months ago, he'd had a mother and father and a small farm in Missouri. Now he had nothing but the clothes on his back and the haunted look of a child who'd seen too much too soon. Eleanor took him to her room at the boarding house and helped him wash and change into clean clothes that Martha had found. He was silent through it all, moving like a sleepwalker, and Eleanor's heart broke for him. Henry, she said gently, kneeling down to his level. I know you're sad and scared. I know you don't understand why this happened. I wish I could explain it in a way that would make it hurt less, but I can't. All I can tell you is that you're safe now, and I'm going to take care of you until we can find your family in Denver. The boy looked at her with eyes far too old for his face. Mama said there wasn't no family in Denver. She lied so the Cowboys would help us. Eleanor felt the words like a punch. Then where were you really going? Nowhere. Henry's voice was flat, empty of emotion. We were just going 'cause we couldn't stay where we was. Daddy died, and the man who owned our farm said we had to leave. Mama thought maybe we'd find work somewhere west, but she got sick, and now she's gone too. Eleanor pulled the boy into her arms, and finally, he began to cry. Great wrenching sobs that shook his thin frame. She held him and let him cry, thinking about orphaned children and broken promises, and the way life could strip everything away without warning. When Cole knocked on her door an hour later, he found them both sitting on the bed, Henry's head in Eleanor's lap while she stroked his hair and hummed a melody her own mother had sung to her once, a lifetime ago. I buried her in the town cemetery, Cole said quietly from the doorway. Reverend Michaels said some words. It was simple but respectful. Thank you, Eleanor said. What are you going to do about the boy? Keep him, at least for now. Cole stepped into the room, his hat in his hands. Eleanor, you can't just decide to keep someone else's child. There are legal considerations, orphanages. I don't care about legal considerations. Eleanor's voice was fierce, protective. This child has lost everything. I won't let him be sent to some institution where he's just a number in a ledger. If there's family to be found, we'll find them. But until then, he stays with me. Cole studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, I'll see what I can find out about orphan placement laws in Kansas. Maybe there's a way to make this temporary guardianship official. You'd do that? The drive pulls out tomorrow, Cole said. But I'll leave instructions with the territorial offices in Denver. Someone there should be able to help you navigate the legal matters. He paused, then added, You're a good person, Eleanor Price. That boy's lucky to have found you. After Cole left, Eleanor sat with Henry until he fell asleep, exhausted from grief. She watched him breathe, this child who'd fallen into her life like a stone into still water, creating ripples that would change everything. She thought about what Cole had said earlier, about living in the past versus living in the present. Maybe this was the universe's way of forcing her into the present, of giving her something real and immediate to care about, instead of a ghost who might never materialize. That evening, for the first time in 5 years, Eleanor didn't go to the fence. She stayed in her room with Henry, reading to him from her old primer, teaching him simple sums, trying to coax smiles from his solemn face. And when darkness fell and Martha came to check on them, she found Eleanor and Henry both asleep in the narrow bed, the child curled against her side like he'd been there forever. The next morning, the cattle drive prepared to move on. Eleanor stood with Henry on the boarding house porch, watching as cowboys saddled up and herds were gathered. She'd come to say goodbye to Cole, to thank him for his help, and found herself reluctant to see him go. "Here," Cole said, pressing a folded piece of paper into her hand. "That's the name and address of a lawyer in Denver who specializes in family law. Tell him I sent you. He owes me a favor. And this," he produced a second paper, "is information about the mining office investigations. I paid a courier service to check with them weekly and forward any responses to you here in Silver Creek. Cole, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking, I'm offering." His gray eyes were warm in the morning light. "I told you I'd help you find answers, and I meant it. Just because the drive is moving on doesn't mean I'm abandoning the search." Eleanor felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest, gratitude mixed with something warmer, something she was afraid to examine too closely. "I don't know how to thank you. Take care of that boy. Give him the kind of second chance you're hoping Luke will give you. That'll be thanks enough." Cole looked down at Henry, who clung to Eleanor's skirts. "You be good for Miss Price, you hear? She's one of the finest ladies in Kansas Territory." Henry nodded solemnly, and Cole ruffled his hair before mounting his horse. The animal danced sideways, eager to move, and Cole had to work to keep him steady. "Will you come back?" Eleanor asked before she could stop herself. "Through Silver Creek, I mean. Do the cattle drives come through regularly?" "This route? Every year, give or take. Trail conditions and market prices depending." Cole settled his hat lower. "I'll make a point of checking in when we pass through next spring. See how you and Henry are doing. See if those letters from Colorado came through." "I'd like that," Eleanor said, surprised by how much she meant it. Cole touched his hat brim in farewell, then rode to join the drive. Eleanor watched until he was just another silhouette against the prairie, then turned and led Henry back inside, where Martha had breakfast waiting and a new day was beginning. That evening, Eleanor took Henry's hand and walked to the fence line. The boy looked up at her curiously as she stood at her usual spot, but he didn't ask questions. He'd learned young that grown-ups did strange things for reasons children couldn't understand. Eleanor pulled Luke's last letter from her pocket and read it one more time. Then she looked down at Henry, at this child who needed her in a way that was real and present and urgent, and made a decision. "Henry," she said, "I want to tell you about someone I used to know. His name was Luke, and he made me a lot of promises once. I've spent 5 years waiting for him to keep those promises. But you know what I realized today? While I was waiting for one promise to come true, I was missing all the other ways the universe was trying to give me exactly what I needed." The boy looked at her with solemn eyes. "Do you still love him? The promise man?" "I think I'll always love the memory of him," Eleanor said honestly. "But maybe that's all it is now. A memory. And maybe it's time I stopped living in memories and started living in reality." She folded the letter carefully and tucked it away. She didn't throw it away. She wasn't ready for that, might never be ready for that. But she also didn't unfold it and read it like a scripture. Didn't stand there imagining Luke's return with the same desperate intensity she'd maintained for so long. Instead, she took Henry's hand and they walked back toward town together, toward the boarding house where Martha was keeping supper warm, toward the life that was actually happening instead of the life she'd been imagining. Behind them, the sun set on another Kansas evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The fence post stood where it always had, waiting like a faithful servant for a master who might never return. But for the first time in 5 years, Eleanor didn't feel the need to stand vigil beside it. She had someone who needed her here, now, in the present moment. And perhaps that was its own kind of promise, one that didn't require letters or assurances, one that simply asked her to show up each day and care for the child who'd been placed in her path. As they reached the boarding house, Henry looked up at her and spoke for the first time since his mother's death. "Miss Eleanor, do you think maybe I could stay with you? Not just for a little while, for a long while?" Eleanor knelt down and cupped his face in her hands, seeing past the dirt and the fear to the resilient spirit underneath. "I think that could be arranged, Henry. In fact, I think I'd like that very much." And for the first time since Cole Barrett had ridden into Silver Creek, Eleanor felt something she'd almost forgotten. Not hope exactly, but something quieter and more sustainable. Something that felt like the beginning of healing, the first tentative steps toward a future she couldn't yet imagine but was finally willing to consider. The past would always be there, waiting at fence lines and folded into letters. But the present was here, warm and real, holding her hand and asking to be loved. And Eleanor, who'd spent 5 years looking backward, finally turned her face toward what was ahead. The first week with Henry taught Eleanor more about herself than 5 years of solitary waiting ever had. The boy moved through her small room at the boarding house like a quiet shadow, speaking only when spoken to, eating whatever was placed before him with mechanical efficiency. He didn't cry again after that first day, and somehow his dry-eyed silence was worse than any tantrum could have been. Martha had helped Eleanor move into a larger room on the ground floor, one with 2 beds and a window that overlooked the small garden behind the boarding house. It wasn't much, but Eleanor hung curtains she'd sewn herself and placed wildflowers in a jar on the windowsill, trying to make it feel like home for a child who'd lost his. "You need to give him time," Martha said one morning as they watched Henry pick at his breakfast. "Grief doesn't follow a schedule, especially not for children." "I know. I just wish I knew how to reach him." Eleanor stirred her coffee, though she had no intention of drinking it. Sleep had been elusive since Henry arrived, her nights filled with the boy's muffled nightmares and her own swirling thoughts about futures she hadn't planned for. "You're doing exactly what he needs. You're being present and consistent. That's more than most orphans get." Martha refilled Eleanor's cup despite her protests. "Speaking of which, have you thought about how you're going to manage? A school teacher's salary doesn't stretch far when you're feeding 2 mouths instead of 1. Eleanor had thought about it. She'd thought about little else during the long, wakeful nights. "I'll take on private students in the evenings. Some of the ranchers' children need extra help with reading and arithmetic. And I can do mending. My mother made sure I learned proper needlework even if I hated every stitch. That's a lot of work on top of teaching full days. I'll manage. I have to." Eleanor glanced at Henry, who'd abandoned his eggs and was staring out the window at nothing in particular. "He's already lost everything. I won't let him lose stability, too." What Eleanor didn't say, couldn't quite articulate even to herself, was how caring for Henry had created a strange sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. The constant worry about his well-being, the practical challenges of keeping a child fed and clothed and safe, these concerns left little room for the obsessive wondering about Luke that had consumed her for so long. She still thought about him, still felt the familiar ache when she saw couples walking together, or heard love songs drifting from the saloon. But the sharp edge of that longing had dulled slightly, blunted by the immediate demands of the present. 2 weeks after the cattle drive had departed, Eleanor stood at her classroom door watching the autumn rain turn Silver Creek's main street into a river of mud. The students had been dismissed early due to the weather, and Henry sat at one of the desks practicing his letters. She'd been working with him each evening, amazed at how quickly he absorbed lessons when given patient attention. "Miss Price?" Sarah Beth Crawford appeared in the doorway, dripping wet despite her oilskin coat. "My ma sent me with a message. There's a man at our house asking about you, says he's got a letter from Colorado." Eleanor's heart lurched. "What kind of letter?" "Don't know. Ma just said you should come when you can." Sarah Beth glanced at Henry. "You want me to watch the boy while you go?" "No, he'll come with me." Eleanor grabbed her shawl and Henry's hand. "Thank you, Sarah Beth. Tell your mother we'll be there shortly." They hurried through the rain, Henry's small legs struggling to keep pace. The Crawford house sat at the far end of town, a neat 2-story structure that served as both home and office for Sarah Beth's father, who worked as the town's informal postmaster and freight agent. When they arrived, Mrs. Crawford ushered them inside with concerned efficiency. "Eleanor, dear, you're soaked through. Let me get you both some towels." She disappeared into the back of the house, leaving Eleanor and Henry standing in the front parlor where a middle-aged man in a traveling coat waited. "Miss Eleanor Price." The man stood and extended his hand. "I'm Warren Mitchell, courier service out of Denver. I was hired by a Mr. Cole Barrett to deliver correspondence to you regarding a mining inquiry." Eleanor's hand shook as she accepted the thick envelope he produced from his satchel. "You came all this way in this weather?" "I was passing through on other business, ma'am. Mr. Barrett paid extra to ensure prompt delivery of any responses." Mitchell tipped his hat. "If you'll excuse me, I need to get back on the road before it gets worse. Mrs. Crawford will validate receipt of delivery." He was gone before Eleanor could properly thank him, and she stood holding the envelope like it might explode. Henry pressed against her side, silent as always, but his small hand gripped her skirt tightly. Mrs. Crawford returned with towels and sympathetic eyes. "Would you like to open that here, Eleanor? In private?" No, I should—" Eleanor swallowed hard. "I should go back to the boarding house. Thank you, Mrs. Crawford." The walk back seemed to take both forever, and no time at all. Eleanor clutched the envelope against her chest, protecting it from the rain, her mind spinning through every possible outcome. News of Luke alive, news of Luke dead, news of nothing conclusive at all. She didn't know which she feared most. Martha took one look at her face when they returned and immediately took charge of Henry, promising him cookies and hot cocoa in the kitchen. Eleanor retreated to her room, placed the envelope on her bed, and stared at it for a long time before finding the courage to break the seal. Inside were 3 separate letters. The first was from the Central City Mining Association, written in cramped, official script. Eleanor forced herself to read slowly, to comprehend each word even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "Dear Miss Price, in response to your inquiry dated October 2nd, 1877, we have searched our records for information regarding one Luke Callahan. Our records indicate that a man by that name held a mining claim in the Central City District from March 1873 to November 1873. The claim, designated CC 847, was registered under his name and military service record as you described. On November 14, 1873, there was a collapse in the mine shaft adjacent to Mr. Callahan's claim. The collapse resulted in 6 confirmed fatalities. Mr. Callahan's name appears on the preliminary casualty list compiled by the Territorial Marshal's Office. However, we must note that body identification was difficult due to the nature of the accident, and final death certificates list several victims as presumed deceased rather than confirmed. Mr. Callahan's claim was declared abandoned in January 1874 when no one came forward to maintain the registration. His personal effects, if any remained, would have been disposed of according to standard procedures. We hope this information proves helpful in your search. Respectfully, Thomas J. Harrington, Records Administrator, Central City Mining Association. Eleanor read the letter 3 times, each word cutting deeper. Presumed deceased. Not confirmed, but presumed. It was the worst kind of answer. Neither definitive proof of death nor confirmation of life. Just another layer of uncertainty. The second letter was from the Colorado Territorial Claims Office, reiterating much of the same information with additional bureaucratic details about property disposition and legal procedures for declaring someone deceased in absentia. Eleanor skimmed it, finding nothing new, nothing that offered real clarity. The third letter made her hands shake. It was written on different paper, in different handwriting, rough and unpracticed, as if the writer was more accustomed to holding tools than pens. Miss Price, my name is Jack Wheeler. I worked the claim next to Luke Callahan's back in '73. The mining office gave me your letter because they thought I could tell you more than their records show. I'm real sorry to write you bad news, but I figure you deserve the truth. Luke and me, we worked side by side for about 7 months. He was a good man, talked about you often, showed me a picture he carried, pretty lady in a fancy dress. He said you were waiting for him back east, that once he struck it rich, he was going to send for you and marry you proper. The day of the collapse, Luke was in the shaft when it happened. I was outside, had just come up for water. I heard the whole thing, the rumbling, the screaming, the silence after. We dug for 3 days straight trying to reach them, but the whole tunnel had caved in. We got 3 bodies out,
The other three, including Luke, were buried too deep. The rock was unstable, and the marshal said it was too dangerous to keep digging. I'm sorry to say it plain, but Luke didn't make it out of that mine, Miss Price. We had a service for all 6 men, said words over the shaft entrance before they sealed it permanent. I kept Luke's things for a while, hoping maybe someone would come asking. After a year, I sold what I could and gave the money to the widow's fund. There was one thing I kept meaning to pass on if anyone ever came looking. Luke had been working on a letter to you the morning of the collapse. It was in his coat pocket, never finished. I've enclosed it with this. Figure it belongs to you more than anyone. I'm sorry for your loss. Luke spoke of you like you hung the moon. Whatever you two had, it was real and it mattered. Respectfully, Jack Wheeler. Eleanor's vision blurred as she unfolded the final piece of paper, smaller than the others, stained and creased from years of being carried in a stranger's pocket. The handwriting was unmistakably Luke's, though more hurried than his earlier letters, the words trailing off mid-sentence. My dearest Eleanor, 7 months in these mountains, and I still dream of you every night. The claim is producing steady, nothing spectacular but enough to keep going. The winter here is brutal, snow like I've never seen, cold that cuts right through to your bones. But I think of you in that warm parlor in Boston, and it keeps me going. I know I promised I'd send for you by Christmas, and I know that Christmas has come and gone. I'm ashamed I haven't written more, but the truth is I wanted to have something real to offer you before I asked you to give up your whole life. I wanted to be able to say, come west, and you'll want for nothing, instead of come west and share my struggle. I'm close now, Eleanor. I can feel it. Another few months, and I'll have enough to buy proper land, build a proper house, the kind of home you deserve. And then I'll write you the letter I've been composing in my head for months. The one where I beg you to forgive my silence and ask you to marry me, and... The letter ended there, the sentence unfinished, the rest forever lost in a mine shaft in Colorado. Eleanor sat on her bed holding these papers. Official records of death, a stranger's testimony, Luke's final words, and felt the last fragile thread of hope snap inside her chest. All these years, all of this waiting, all the what-ifs and maybes she'd clung to like lifelines. And the truth had been sitting in a sealed mine shaft since 1873, buried under tons of rock with the man who'd promised her forever. She didn't cry. The tears wouldn't come, blocked by something harder and colder than grief. She felt hollow, scooped out, as if someone had reached inside her and removed some vital organ she couldn't name. A soft knock on her door made her look up. Henry stood in the doorway, his eyes wide and worried. In his hands he held a cup of tea that sloshed slightly as he walked toward her. Miss Martha said tea helps when you're sad, he said quietly, offering her the cup. Are you sad, Miss Eleanor? Eleanor took the tea with shaking hands. Yes, Henry, I'm very sad. Is it because of the letter? Yes? Henry climbed onto the bed beside her, his small body warm against her side. My mama got a letter once that made her sad. It was about my daddy being sick. She cried for a long time. Did the sadness get better? No. Henry's honesty was brutal in its simplicity. But she said sometimes you just gotta keep living even when you don't want to. She said that's what brave people do. Eleanor wrapped her arm around the boy, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Your mama was very wise. They sat together in the fading afternoon light, the rain drumming against the window, both of them refugees from grief learning how to exist in a world that kept taking things away. Eventually, Martha appeared with bowls of stew and gentle questions Eleanor couldn't answer. She ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind circling the same thoughts over and over. Luke was dead. Had been dead for almost 4 years. All this time she'd been waiting for a ghost, standing at that fence line calling out to someone who couldn't hear her. All this time she'd been in love with a memory, just as Cole had suggested. Cole. The thought of him brought a different kind of ache. He'd known. Not the specifics, perhaps, but he'd suspected, and he'd tried to prepare her. Had tried to gently turn her thoughts toward the present instead of the past. And she'd resisted, clinging to her vigil like it was the only thing keeping her alive. That night, after Henry had fallen asleep, Eleanor returned to the fence line one last time. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and sharp, and stars emerged between breaking clouds. She stood at her usual spot, Luke's unfinished letter pressed against her heart, and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her loss.
"I'm sorry," she whispered to the darkness. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry you died alone in that cold mountain thinking I'd abandoned you. I'm sorry I wasted 5 years waiting instead of living. I'm sorry for all of it." The prairie wind whispered back, carrying away her words into the vastness.
And Eleanor understood finally that Luke wasn't here, had never been here. She'd been talking to herself all along, projecting her hopes and fears onto empty air and fence posts. "I have to let you go now," she said, tears finally coming. "I have to stop waiting. There's a little boy back at the boarding house who needs me to be present, to be whole, to be something other than the woman who stands at fences talking to ghosts, and I want to be that person for him. I want to be that person for myself." She stood there until the cold drove her back toward town, toward the warm lights of the boarding house where Henry slept, and Martha worried, and life continued its relentless forward march. As she walked, Eleanor felt something shift inside her, not healing exactly, but the first painful stirrings of acceptance. The next morning, she went to Reverend Michael's and asked him to hold a memorial service for Luke Callahan. If there was no body to bury, at least there could be words spoken, prayers offered, a formal acknowledgement of a life lost and a love that had mattered. The service was small, just Eleanor, Henry, Martha, the Reverend, and a handful of townspeople who'd grown fond of the persistent schoolteacher. Eleanor wore black and held Henry's hand as Reverend Michaels spoke about sacrifice and love and the mysterious ways of providence. When it was over, Eleanor placed a small wooden marker at the edge of the cemetery with Luke's name and the dates she knew. Born 1842, died 1873, beloved and remembered. "Is he really buried there?" Henry asked as they walked away. "No, but his memory is, and sometimes that's all we get to keep." The weeks that followed were strange and difficult. Eleanor found herself grieving not just Luke's death, but the 5 years she'd lost to waiting. She mourned the woman she might have become if she'd faced the truth sooner, the experiences she'd missed while standing vigil at that fence line. But she also discovered, slowly and with surprise, that she was capable of moving forward. She took on 3 private students, teaching them reading and arithmetic in the evenings after her regular school day ended. The extra income meant she could afford small luxuries for Henry, a proper winter coat, new boots, books of his own. She accepted an invitation to the church social and discovered she could make conversation with Samuel Morrison without feeling like she was betraying Luke's memory. Henry began to emerge from his shell, asking questions and occasionally even laughing at Tommy's antics during school. He attached himself to Eleanor with fierce loyalty, following her around the boarding house like a small shadow, always checking to make sure she hadn't disappeared the way everyone else in his life had. "You're doing good work with that boy," Martha said one evening as they sat on the porch shelling peas. Henry was in the yard trying to teach himself to whittle with a knife Samuel Morrison had given him. "He's coming back to life." "We're helping each other," Eleanor said. "I think we both needed someone to care about." "Have you thought about making it official? Adopting him?" Eleanor had thought about it constantly. "I don't know if it's possible. I'm an unmarried woman with a teacher's income. The courts might decide he'd be better off with a family, with a father. The courts might also see a boy who's thriving with a woman who loves him." Martha's needles clicked steadily. "That lawyer Cole Barrett mentioned, have you written to him?" "Not yet. I've been afraid to hope for too much." "Hope is what we have, Eleanor. It's what keeps us getting out of bed each morning." Martha paused, then added carefully, "Speaking of which, that fence post has been looking lonely lately." Eleanor smiled despite herself. "I visit it still, sometimes. But I don't wait there anymore. I just remember. Say hello to who I used to be. That's healthy. The past should be a place we visit, not a place we live." Before Eleanor could respond, a rider appeared on the road leading into town. Even from a distance, Eleanor recognized the easy way he sat his horse, the gray duster that marked him as someone who spent more time outdoors than in. Her heart did a complicated thing in her chest, part surprise, part pleasure, part something she wasn't ready to examine. "Well now," Martha said quietly, "looks like your cowboy scout came back early." "He's not my cowboy." "Honey, the way you just smiled when you saw him says otherwise." Cole dismounted in front of the boarding house, removing his hat as he approached the porch.
He looked tired but pleased, his face more weathered than Eleanor remembered. "Ladies, hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Martha said, standing and gathering her bowl of peas. "I just remembered I need to check on the roast. Eleanor, why don't you offer Mr. Barrett some lemonade?" She disappeared inside with unseemly haste, leaving Eleanor and Cole facing each other across the porch railing. Henry had noticed the visitor and was watching curiously from his spot in the yard. "I thought the drive wouldn't come back through until spring," Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "It won't. I left it in Wyoming, told the trail boss I had personal business in Kansas." Cole's gray eyes searched her face. "I heard about the letters from Colorado. The courier service sent word to Denver. I came as soon as I could." "You came all this way because of letters?" "I came because I wanted to make sure you were all right." He climbed the porch steps, moving with careful deliberation. "Are you? All right?" Eleanor considered the question. Was she all right? A month ago, the answer would have been a resounding no. But now, with Henry in the yard and Martha fussing in the kitchen, and the weight of 5 years finally lifted from her shoulders, she found the answer was more complicated. "I'm getting there," she said honestly. "It was hard, learning the truth. Harder than I expected, even though part of me had known for a long time. But having the truth, having certainty, it's like finally being able to set down something I'd been carrying for too long." Cole nodded slowly. "I'm sorry it wasn't better news." "Are you? You warned me that first day. You said even if we found him, he might not be the man I remembered. I think you knew what we'd find." "I suspected." Cole leaned against the porch railing. "I've known too many men who went into those mountains looking for fortune. Most of them found hardship and early graves. When you describe Callahan as ambitious and determined, I figured the mines might have gotten him. You could have told me your suspicions. Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was just another person trying to make you give up?" Eleanor smiled ruefully. "Probably the latter. I wasn't ready to hear the truth. I had to find it myself." She glanced at Henry, who'd returned to his whittling but kept sneaking looks at Cole. "Things have changed since you left." "I can see that. Who's the boy?" "His name is Henry. His mother died the day after you left, the woman from the cattle drive. She had pneumonia. Henry had nowhere to go, so I took him in." Eleanor heard the defensive note in her voice and tried to soften it. "It's temporary. I'm looking into finding him proper placement." "Is that what you want, for it to be temporary?" The question cut straight to the heart of Eleanor's confusion. "I don't know what I want. I never expected to be responsible for a child. But he needs stability and care, and I can provide that. At least for now." Cole was quiet for a moment, watching Henry. "He's lucky to have you. Most women wouldn't take on that kind of burden." "He's not a burden." The words came out sharper than Eleanor intended. "He's a child who's lost everything. If giving him a safe place to land is a burden, then I'll carry it gladly." "I didn't mean it like that." Cole held up his hands in apology. "I just meant you've taken on a lot. Grief and responsibility and uncertainty all at once. That takes strength." Eleanor felt her defensiveness ease. "I'm sorry. I've been on edge lately, worrying about how I'm going to make everything work. The finances, the legal aspects, keeping him safe and happy while I'm still figuring out how to be someone other than the woman who waits at fences. For what it's worth, from what I can see, you're doing fine. Better than fine." Cole smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "The boy looks healthy, and he's watching me like he's trying to decide if I'm a threat to you. That means he's attached, which means you're doing something right." "Miss Eleanor?" Henry had abandoned his whittling and approached the porch, his small face serious. "Is this man staying for supper?" Eleanor looked at Cole, suddenly wanting him to say yes, to stay, to be part of this strange new life she was building from the ruins of the old one. But before she could speak, Cole answered. "If Miss Eleanor and Miss Martha don't mind, I'd be honored to join you." He stepped down from the porch and extended his hand to Henry. "I'm Cole Barrett. I met Miss Eleanor a while back and wanted to check on how she was doing. You must be Henry." Henry shook his hand with the exaggerated formality of a child trying to act grown up. "I'm 7, almost 8. Miss Eleanor is teaching me letters and numbers. I can write my whole name now." "That's mighty impressive. I didn't learn to write my name until I was 9. "Really?"
Henry's eyes widened. Why not? Didn't have anyone to teach me. I grew up on a ranch so far from town we only saw other people a few times a year. Learned to read from my mother, but writing came later. Do you still live on a ranch? No, I travel mostly. Work cattle drives, scout for wagon trains, take odd jobs here and there. Haven't had a permanent home in about 15 years. Henry processed this information with the seriousness he brought to everything. Don't you get lonely? The question clearly caught Cole off guard. Eleanor watched something flicker across his face, pain, recognition, carefully controlled vulnerability. Sometimes, he admitted, but I've gotten used to it. Moving suits me better than staying still. I used to move a lot, Henry said quietly. When Mama and Daddy were alive, we moved 3 times looking for work. I didn't like it. I like it better here with Miss Eleanor. She stays in the same place. The simple statement carried such weight that Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. She'd never asked Henry how he felt about his nomadic early life, had assumed children were simply resilient and adapted. But here was proof that stability mattered, that choosing to stay and be present was its own kind of gift. Martha appeared at the door, wiping her hands on her apron. Supper's ready, if you folks want to come in. Mr. Barrett, I hope you like pot roast because I made enough to feed an army. Ma'am, I've been eating trail food for months. Your pot roast smells like heaven itself. The meal was surprisingly comfortable. Henry sat between Eleanor and Cole, asking endless questions about cattle drives and horses, and whether Cole had ever seen any Indians. Cole answered patiently, his stories edited for a child's ears but still vivid enough to capture Henry's imagination. Eleanor found herself laughing more than she had in months, watching the interplay between the gruff scout and the serious boy. After supper, while Martha and Eleanor cleaned up and Henry practiced his letters at the kitchen table, Cole stood at the window looking out at the darkening prairie. Eleanor joined him, drying her hands on a towel. Thank you for coming back, she said quietly. You didn't have to, but I'm glad you did. I couldn't stop thinking about you after I left. Cole kept his eyes on the window. Worrying about what those letters might say, whether you'd have anyone to help you through it. The not knowing was worse than any delay in the drive schedule. Eleanor studied his profile in the lamplight. Cole, why did you really come back? And don't say it was just to check on me. You barely knew me when you left. Why go to all this trouble for a stranger? He turned to face her, his gray eyes serious and searching. Because you reminded me of someone I used to be. Someone so focused on the past that they couldn't see what was right in front of them. I wasted 10 years of my life looking for my brother, chasing ghosts across the frontier, convinced that if I could just find him, everything would make sense again. And you know what I learned? What? That some questions don't have answers. Some people stay lost. And if you're not careful, you can lose yourself in the searching. Cole's voice was rough with emotion. I saw you standing at that fence, and I saw myself 10 years ago, and I thought maybe I could help you find your way out faster than I found mine. And did you? Help me? I don't know, did I? Eleanor considered this. You gave me the truth. That's more than anyone else was willing to do. Everyone else just told me to move on, to forget, to accept. But you actually helped me search, even knowing what we'd probably find. That mattered. It mattered a lot. Good. Cole's expression softened. Because I plan to stick around for a while, if that's all right with you. Eleanor's heart skipped. Stick around? What about the cattle drive? I quit. Told the trail boss I was done wandering for a while, that I needed to see what it was like to stay in one place longer than a season. He smiled slightly. I might have also mentioned I'd met someone worth staying for. Cole, I can't. I'm not ready for... Eleanor struggled to find words for the complicated tangle of feelings in her chest. Luke's been gone less than 2 months. I'm still figuring out who I am without him, without the waiting. And I have Henry now, responsibilities I never expected. I don't have room in my life for anything else right now. I'm not asking for anything else. Cole's voice was gentle but firm. I'm just asking to stay, to be a friend if you need one, to help with Henry if you'll let me. No expectations, no pressure, just presence. Why would you do that? Because I've spent 15 years running from loneliness, and I'm tired of running. Because you're the first person in a long time who made me want to stop and see what staying might feel like. And because that boy in there needs more people in his corner, and I'd like to be one of them." Before Eleanor could respond, Henry appeared in the doorway. "Miss Eleanor, I've finished my letters. Can I show Mr. Cole?" "Of course." Eleanor watched as the boy took Cole's hand and led him back to the kitchen table, chattering about the difference between upper and lower case letters. Cole listened with genuine interest, offering encouragement and asking questions that showed he was really paying attention. Martha moved to stand beside Eleanor, both of them watching from the doorway. "That man's in love with you," Martha said matter-of-factly. "Don't be ridiculous. He barely knows me." "Some people know right away. They see what they've been looking for and they recognize it instantly." Martha dried a plate with methodical care. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "Nothing. I'm not ready for anything like that." "I didn't say you were, but maybe don't close the door completely. Good men who are willing to stay, they're rarer than you think." That night, Eleanor lay awake listening to Henry's soft breathing from the other bed, thinking about fence posts and letters and cowboys who came back when they didn't have to. She thought about Luke, dead 4 years in a Colorado mine shaft, and Cole, very much alive and offering friendship with no demands attached. She thought about the woman she'd been when she came to Silver Creek, heartbroken and determined and so certain that waiting was the same as loving. And she thought about the woman she was becoming, someone who could care for a grieving child, who could accept hard truths, who could maybe, eventually, open her heart again without betraying the memory of what came before. It was too soon for anything more than friendship. But friendship, Eleanor decided, was a good place to start. The next day, Cole rented a room at the boarding house and began looking for work in Silver Creek. He found it quickly. The town's blacksmith needed help, and Cole's experience with horses and metalwork made him a natural fit. Within a week, he'd settled into a routine, working at the forge during the day, taking meals at Martha's table, helping Henry with his evening chores, and sometimes sitting on the porch with Eleanor in the twilight, talking about everything and nothing. He never pushed for more than she was willing to give, never asked about Luke or her feelings or what the future might hold. He simply showed up day after day, reliable as sunrise, proving through action rather than words that he meant what he'd said about staying. Henry bloomed under the attention of having both Eleanor and Cole in his life. The nightmares that had plagued him began to fade. He started smiling more, even laughing occasionally at Cole's dry humor, and he began to call Eleanor Mama Eleanor when he thought she wasn't listening, a name that broke her heart and healed it at the same time. 2 months after Cole's return, Eleanor received another letter from Denver. This one was from the lawyer Cole had recommended, and it contained news that made her hands shake as she read. According to territorial law, an unmarried woman could petition for guardianship of an orphan child if she could prove financial stability and moral character. The lawyer had taken the liberty of gathering testimony from Reverend Michaels, Martha Henderson, and several prominent citizens of Silver Creek, all vouching for Eleanor's suitability as a guardian. If Eleanor wanted to proceed with formal adoption, the paperwork was ready to file. She sat on her bed holding the letter, overwhelmed by the enormity of the decision before her. Adopting Henry meant committing to him forever, taking full legal and financial responsibility, accepting that her life would never again be entirely her own. It meant choosing the present over the past, the real over the imagined, the child in front of her over the children she'd once dreamed of having with Luke. "Miss Eleanor?" Henry's voice came from the doorway. "Are you crying?" She was, she realized, tears streaming down her face, but for once they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude, of unexpected joy, of doors closing and windows opening in ways she never could have planned. "Come here, Henry." She held out her arms and he came willingly, climbing into her lap even though he was really getting too big for it. "I need to ask you something important." "Okay." "How would you feel if you stayed with me forever? If I adopted you legally, made you my son in the eyes of the law and everyone else?" Henry pulled back to look at her face, his dark eyes searching hers. "Forever, forever? Not just until you find someone else to take me? Forever, forever. You'd be mine and I'd be yours, no matter what. Would I have to call you Mama?" "Only if you want to." Henry considered this, his face scrunched in thought.
"I think I'd like that," he said finally. "I think I'd like it very much. Can Mr. Cole be part of our family too?" The question surprised her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if you're my mama, could Mr. Cole be my papa? He teaches me stuff and helps with my chores and he makes you smile. That seems like papa things." Eleanor felt her breath catch. "Henry, Cole and I are just friends." "For now," Henry said with the uncanny perception of children. "But maybe not forever. And if he's going to stay around anyway, seems like he should be family too." From the mouths of babes, Eleanor thought, hugging him close. "Let's take it one step at a time, all right? First we make you legally mine. Then we see what else the future holds." "Okay, Mama Eleanor." Henry tested out the name, grinning. "I like how that sounds." "So do I, sweetheart. So do I." That evening, Eleanor found Cole at the forge where he was finishing up a repair job. He looked up when she entered, wiping sweat from his forehead and leaving a smudge of soot in its place. "Eleanor, everything all right?" "I'm going to adopt Henry," she said without preamble. "The lawyer sent papers. It's really going to happen." Cole's face split into a genuine smile. "That's wonderful news. Henry must be over the moon." "He is, but he also said something that made me realize I needed to talk to you." Eleanor took a deep breath. "He asked if you could be his papa, if we could all be a family together." Cole's smile faded into something more complex, hope and caution and careful restraint. "What did you tell him?" "I told him we were taking things one step at a time. But Cole, I need to know what you want, what you expect. Because if you're planning to stay in Silver Creek indefinitely, if you're planning to be part of Henry's life and mine, I need to understand what that means to you." Cole set down his tools and moved closer, his gray eyes intent on her face. "What I want is simple. I want to wake up in the same place every day. I want to eat supper with people who matter to me. I want to help raise a boy who needs a father figure. And I want to be there for you, whatever that looks like, however long it takes for you to be ready for more than friendship. And if I'm never ready, if I can only ever offer friendship, then I'll take friendship and count myself lucky." Cole's voice was steady, certain. "Eleanor, I've spent half my life chasing things that stayed out of reach. I'm done with that. Whatever you can give me, it's enough. You're enough." Eleanor felt something crack open in her chest, a door she'd thought permanently sealed, letting in the first tentative rays of something that might eventually become love. Not the desperate, all-consuming passion she'd felt for Luke, but something quieter and more sustainable. Something built on presence and patience and the daily choice to show up. "I can't make you any promises," she said softly. "I don't know what my heart is capable of right now. I'm not asking for promises. I'm just asking for possibility. For the chance to see what we might become if we're both brave enough to try." "Possibility," Eleanor repeated. "I think I can offer that." Cole's smile returned, warm and full of something Eleanor was afraid to name. "Then that's all I need." As she walked back to the boarding house in the gathering dusk, Eleanor found her feet carrying her toward the old fence post one last time. She stood there as she had hundreds of times before, but everything felt different now. The waiting was over. The searching had ended. Luke was at peace in his Colorado grave, and she was finally ready to be at peace too. "Thank you," she whispered to the memory of him. "Thank you for showing me what love could be, even if we didn't get the ending we planned. I'll carry you with me always, but I'm ready to move forward now. I hope wherever you are you'd understand. I hope you'd be happy for me." The wind whispered through the prairie grass, carrying away her words. And Eleanor turned her back on the fence post and walked toward the warm lights of the boarding house where Henry was waiting for his mother, and Cole was helping Martha set the table for supper, and life was happening in all its messy, beautiful, unexpected glory. The past would always be there, marked by a wooden cross in the cemetery and letters folded in a drawer. But the future was here now, full of possibility and second chances and the quiet courage it took to love again after loss. Eleanor Price was done waiting. She was ready to live. Winter arrived in Silver Creek with the kind of cold that made breath visible and turned the prairie into a canvas of white and gray. Eleanor stood at her classroom window watching snow fall in thick, lazy flakes,
wondering if they'd need to dismiss early again. The students were restless, their attention drawn to the window every few minutes, already anticipating the sledding and snowball fights that would follow the school day. "Miss Price?" Sarah Beth Crawford raised her hand. "My pa says this is going to be the worst winter in 20 years. Is that true?" "Your father knows the weather patterns better than I do, Sarah Beth, but whether it's the worst or not, we need to be prepared. That means staying close to home when storms come through and making sure your families have adequate supplies." Eleanor turned from the window to face her students. "Now, who can tell me what supplies a family would need to survive a harsh winter? Think about what we discussed last week regarding prairie survival." The lesson continued, but Eleanor's mind kept drifting to her own winter preparations. The small room she shared with Henry at the boarding house was warm enough, but she worried about coal supplies and whether Henry's new coat would be sufficient for the truly bitter days ahead. She worried about her students who lived on isolated homesteads, about whether all of them would make it through the season healthy and whole. Most of all, she worried about the adoption papers that had been sitting on her dresser for 3 weeks, still unsigned. The lawyer had made it clear they needed to be filed before the end of the year if Eleanor wanted to avoid additional bureaucratic delays. But every time she picked up the pen to sign them, her hand trembled with the weight of what she was choosing. It wasn't that she doubted her love for Henry or her ability to care for him. It was the finality of it that paralyzed her. Once she signed those papers, she was declaring to the world that this was her life now, single mother, school teacher, woman who'd given up on the dreams she'd carried west. It felt like signing away the last remnants of the Eleanor who'd fallen in love with Luke Callahan, who'd believed in fairy tale endings and happily ever afters. The school day ended with a dusting of snow on the ground and more falling steadily. Eleanor dismissed the students early, watching carefully to ensure each group headed toward home before she allowed herself to leave. Henry waited at his usual desk, already bundled in his coat, practicing the alphabet with a piece of chalk on his personal slate. "Ready to go home?" Eleanor asked, pulling on her own shawl and the heavy wool coat Martha had altered for her. "Can we stop at the forge first? Mr. Cole said he had a surprise for me." Eleanor felt the now familiar flutter in her chest at the mention of Cole's name, a sensation she still wasn't sure how to interpret or what to do about. "All right, but just for a few minutes. The snow is getting heavier." They made their way through Silver Creek's main street, now transformed into a winter scene that would have looked at home on a Christmas card. Smoke rose from chimneys, windows glowed with lamplight, and the few people out braved the cold with hunched shoulders and quick steps. The forge was at the far end of town, a squat building that radiated heat even from the outside. Cole looked up when they entered, his face breaking into a smile that made Eleanor's heart do complicated things. He was covered in soot as usual, his sleeves rolled up despite the cold, his gray eyes bright in the firelight from the forge. "Right on time," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Henry, come here. I've got something for you." Henry rushed forward eagerly, all traces of his earlier solemnity forgotten in the excitement of a promised surprise. Cole reached behind his workbench and produced a small wooden box, which he opened to reveal a set of simple tools, a small hammer, a pair of tongs, and several metal files. "These are your tools now," Cole said, crouching down to Henry's level. "I made them specially sized for your hands. If you want, I can teach you basic metalwork. Nothing dangerous, just simple projects. But only if your mother agrees." Both Henry and Cole looked at Eleanor waiting. She felt the significance of the moment, Cole asking her permission as Henry's mother, acknowledging her authority while offering to share something of himself with the boy. It was a gesture of respect and inclusion that made her throat tight with emotion. "I think that's a wonderful idea," she managed, "as long as Henry promises to follow all your safety instructions." "I promise." Henry clutched the box to his chest like treasure. "Can we start today?" "Not today. The snow's getting serious and you need to get home. But tomorrow after school, if your mother can spare you for an hour, we'll start with something simple. Deal?" "Deal." Henry extended his hand solemnly, and Cole shook it with equal gravity, sealing their agreement. As they prepared to leave, Cole caught Eleanor's arm gently. "Can you wait just a minute? There's something I want to show you, too." Eleanor nodded, curiosity overriding her concern about the weather. Cole led her to the back of the forge, where a large object sat covered by canvas. With a flourish, he pulled the covering away to reveal a beautiful iron bed frame, complete with an intricate scrollwork headboard. "I've been working on it in the evenings," Cole said, suddenly shy. "I heard you mention that Henry was getting too big for the small bed in your room, and I thought you might need something larger. Something that could be his, that would make that room feel more like a real home." Eleanor ran her fingers over the metalwork, marveling at the craftsmanship. Each scroll and curve was perfectly executed, the joints solid and smooth. It was the kind of work that took time and patience and genuine care, not something knocked together quickly, but something built to last. "Cole, this is beautiful, but I can't accept something like this. The cost of materials alone. I use scrap metal from the forge. Sam lets me have whatever's left over from jobs. And the time was mine to spend how I wanted." Cole's voice was firm but gentle. "Let me do this, Eleanor. Let me give Henry something that's his own, something he can keep no matter what happens." The implication hung in the air between them. No matter what happens with us, with you and me, with whatever this thing is that we're building. Eleanor understood that Cole was drawing a line between his feelings for her and his care for Henry, making it clear that his commitment to the boy wasn't contingent on her reciprocation. "Thank you," she said softly. "It means more than you know. When can you deliver it?" "Tomorrow? I'll bring it by after I finish work. Should only take me and Sam about an hour to set it up in your room." "Mama Eleanor, can we go now?" Henry called from the front of the forge. "I'm getting hungry." "Coming, sweetheart." Eleanor touched Cole's arm briefly. "Tomorrow, then. And Cole, thank you for all of this, for being so patient with both of us." His smile was answer enough, and Eleanor left the forge feeling lighter than she had in weeks. As she and Henry walked back through the falling snow, she made a decision. Tonight, after Henry went to sleep, she would sign those adoption papers. It was time to stop hesitating, time to claim the life that was actually happening instead of mourning the one that never would. That evening, after a supper of Martha's beef stew and fresh bread, after Henry had practiced his letters and Cole had joined them for coffee, after the boarding house had settled into its evening quiet, Eleanor sat at the small desk in her room with the adoption papers spread before her. She read through them one final time, all the legal language about rights and responsibilities, about making Henry Morrison officially Henry Morrison Price. Her hand shook only slightly as she dipped her pen in ink and signed her name on the designated line, Eleanor Catherine Price, in the careful script her Boston education had drilled into her. There. It was done. She was a mother now, legally and officially. The knowledge settled over her like a warm blanket, bringing with it a sense of rightness she hadn't expected. This was meant to be. Whatever else happened in her life, however the story with Cole eventually played out, she had this. She had Henry, and that was enough. The next morning dawned clear and bitterly cold, the kind of cold that made the snow squeak underfoot and turned breath into clouds of frost. Eleanor bundled Henry and every warm thing he owned, and they made their way to school, where a note tacked to the door informed her that 3 families had kept their children home due to the weather. The remaining students arrived in clumps, stamping snow from their boots and clustering around the stove. Eleanor taught through chattering teeth, keeping lessons short and active to generate body heat. At noon, she dismissed everyone early, judging that the cold was more dangerous than missing a few hours of instruction. She and Henry hurried back to the boarding house where Martha had hot soup and bread waiting. "Letter came for you this morning," Martha said, producing an envelope from her apron pocket. "From Denver. Looks official." Eleanor's heart jumped. She'd sent the signed adoption papers to the lawyer 3 weeks ago by special courier paying extra for speed and security. This must be the response. She opened the envelope with trembling fingers, scanning the formal language until she found the important part. The adoption had been approved by the territorial court. Pending a review period of 60 days, Henry Morrison would officially become her legal son. Barring any objections or complications, the adoption would be finalized by early February. "Good news?" Martha asked, though Eleanor's face must have already told her the answer. "The best news. Henry's mine. Officially, legally mine." Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes. "Martha, I'm someone's mother." "Honey, you've been someone's mother since the day you took that boy in. The paperwork just makes it official." Martha squeezed her shoulder warmly.
This calls for a celebration. I'll make a special supper tonight, roast chicken and pie. And you should tell Cole. He'll want to know. Eleanor found Cole at the forge that afternoon, working on what looked like a set of horseshoes. He glanced up when she entered, immediately setting aside his work when he saw her expression. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right." She handed him the letter, watching as he read through it, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Eleanor, this is wonderful. Congratulations." He pulled her into a hug before seeming to remember himself and stepping back quickly. "Sorry, I'm happy for you, for both of you." "Don't apologize." Eleanor found herself missing the warmth of his arms already. "You're part of this too, Cole. You've been there for Henry from the beginning. This victory belongs to you as much as it does to me. I appreciate that, but this is your achievement. You're the one who fought for him, who provided stability when his world fell apart." Cole's eyes were warm with something Eleanor was starting to recognize as love, though neither of them had spoken the word aloud. "You're going to be an amazing mother. You already are." "I hope so. I keep worrying I'm not enough, that Henry needs a father as well as a mother, that I'm being selfish keeping him in this unconventional arrangement." "Selfish?" Cole's laugh was incredulous. "Eleanor, you've turned your entire life upside down for this child. You've taken on financial strain and social judgment and endless worry. There's nothing selfish about any of it. And as for Henry needing a father—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "He's got people who care about him. That's what matters. Family doesn't have to look a certain way to be real." Eleanor heard what he wasn't saying, that he could be that father figure if she'd let him, that he was already halfway there in his daily interactions with Henry. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She'd come west for Luke, had spent 5 years grieving him, had only recently begun to accept his death. And now here was Cole, patient and steady, and offering everything she'd thought she'd lost. "Come to supper tonight," she said impulsively. "Martha's making a celebration dinner. It wouldn't be complete without you." "I'd be honored." Cole's smile could have melted the snow outside. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself. That's all we need." The celebration dinner that evening was as close to perfect as Eleanor could have imagined. Martha outdid herself with the food and even dug out a bottle of elderberry wine she'd been saving for special occasions. Henry was allowed to stay up past his bedtime, his eyes shining with excitement as Martha presented him with a small cake decorated with his initials in icing. "This is the best day ever," Henry announced, his mouth full of cake. "Even better than Christmas." "Christmas is still coming," Cole reminded him. "In fact, I was thinking we might go cut down a tree this weekend, if your mother approves." "A real Christmas tree?" Henry's eyes went wide. "We never had a real tree before. Mama said they were too expensive." Eleanor felt the familiar pang at Henry's casual mention of his birth mother, the woman who'd tried so hard to give him a good life and died before she could see him safe. "A tree sounds lovely. We could make decorations for it. I know how to make paper chains and popcorn garlands." "And I can carve a star for the top," Cole added. "If you want." What followed was a planning session that felt remarkably like a family deciding their holiday traditions together. They discussed when to cut the tree, what kind of decorations to make, whether they should attend the Christmas Eve service at Reverend Michael's church. Henry contributed his opinions with enthusiasm, and Eleanor found herself laughing more than she had in years. After dinner, while Martha and Eleanor cleaned up and Henry played with a set of dominoes Cole had given him, Martha spoke quietly. "That man's not going anywhere, you know. He's in this for the long haul." "I know." Eleanor scrubbed a pot with more force than necessary. "That's what scares me." "Why?" "You care about him. Anyone with eyes can see it." "Because caring about someone means risking losing them. I've already lost one person I loved. I don't know if I can survive losing another." Martha took the pot from her hands and set it aside, forcing Eleanor to look at her. "Honey, you can't live your life afraid of loss. Yes, you might lose Cole someday. He might get sick or injured or decide he wants something different. But you might also have 40 happy years together. You might build something beautiful that lasts the rest of your lives. You don't know what the future holds, and that's terrifying, but it's also the nature of being alive." "I thought I knew with Luke. I thought we had forever planned out. And then he died.
And I spent 5 years in limbo, not living, but not quite dead either. I don't want to go through that again. Then don't. Martha's voice was firm. If the worst happens and you lose Cole, grieve him properly and move forward. Don't spend 5 years standing at fence posts. You've learned that lesson already. Use it. Eleanor wanted to argue, to list all the reasons why opening her heart again was foolish and dangerous. But Martha's words resonated with uncomfortable truth. She had learned something from those 5 years of waiting. She'd learned how not to grieve, how not to live. If she let fear dictate her choices now, she'd be betraying everything she'd learned from that painful education. I'm not ready yet, she said finally. To tell Cole how I feel, to take that step, but maybe I'm getting closer. Then take your time. God knows that man will wait. Martha returned to washing dishes. Just don't take so long that you forget how to be happy. You deserve happiness, Eleanor. Both you and that sweet boy deserve a full, joyful life. The weekend arrived with more snow and temperatures that made even short trips outside an ordeal. Cole arrived Saturday morning with a sled and a saw, bundled in so many layers he looked twice his normal size. Henry was beside himself with excitement, bouncing around the boarding house until Martha threatened to make him sit still or miss the adventure entirely. They walked about a mile out of town to a grove of young pines Cole had scouted earlier in the week. The snow was knee-deep in places, and Eleanor found herself grateful for Cole's strength as he broke trail ahead of them, making the journey easier for her and Henry. What about that one? Henry pointed to a tree that must have been 12 feet tall. Too big for your room, Cole said diplomatically. We need something maybe 6 feet, 7 at most. Something that'll fit with room for a star on top. They walked through the grove, examining trees and debating their merits. Henry advocated passionately for the biggest tree possible, while Eleanor argued for something more practical. Cole mediated between them, finding options that might satisfy both preferences. Eventually, they agreed on a full, symmetrical pine that stood about 6.5 feet tall. Cole made quick work of felling the tree, his saw biting through the trunk with practiced efficiency. As the tree fell into the snow with a soft whoosh, Henry cheered and immediately began trying to drag it toward the sled. It took all three of them to maneuver the tree onto the sled and secure it properly, and by the time they finished, everyone was breathing hard and laughing at the absurdity of their snow-covered appearances. The walk back to town was slower, with Cole pulling the laden sled and Eleanor and Henry following in the trail he'd already broken. Henry chattered nonstop about how they'd decorate the tree and where they'd put it, and whether Santa Claus might bring him a present this year. Eleanor and Cole exchanged amused glances over his head, and Eleanor felt something warm unfurl in her chest, a glimpse of what family could look like, should look like. They set the tree up in the corner of Eleanor's room, Cole fashioning a simple stand from scrap wood, while Eleanor and Henry began making decorations. Martha contributed red ribbon and popcorn from the boarding house kitchen, and several of Eleanor's students stopped by with paper ornaments they'd made specifically for Henry's first Christmas tree. By evening, the tree stood resplendent, if somewhat haphazard, in the corner. Paper chains looped between branches, popcorn garlands draped artistically, and Martha's red ribbon provided splashes of color throughout. The carved wooden star Cole had promised sat at the top, simple but perfect, catching the lamplight and sending shadows dancing across the ceiling. It's the most beautiful tree in the whole world, Henry declared, lying on his bed and staring at it with undisguised awe. Don't you think so, Mama Eleanor? The casual use of the name still made Eleanor's heart skip. I think it's perfect, and I think we should thank Mr. Cole for helping us get it. Henry bounded off the bed and threw his arms around Cole's waist. Thank you, Mr. Cole. This was the best day of my whole life. Cole looked startled by the embrace, but recovered quickly, ruffling Henry's hair with genuine affection. You're welcome, son. We'll have to make it a tradition. Cut a tree together every Christmas from now on. The word son hung in the air, and Eleanor saw the moment Cole realized what he'd said, the flash of concern that he'd overstepped. But Henry just beamed and returned to staring at the tree, oblivious to the undercurrents of adult emotion swirling around him. After Henry finally fell asleep, exhausted by the day's adventures, Eleanor walked Cole to the door. They stood in the hallway, speaking in whispers to avoid waking the other boarding house residents. Thank you for today, Eleanor said. You made it magical for him, for both of us, really. It was my pleasure. I can't remember the last time I enjoyed a day so much. Cole hesitated, then added, Eleanor, I know I said I wouldn't push, that I'd wait as long as it takes, but I need you to know something. What? When I called Henry's son earlier, that wasn't a slip of the tongue. That's how I think of him. That's how I think of both of you. And if there ever comes a time when you're ready for more than friendship, I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere. Eleanor's throat tightened with emotion. Cole, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know where I stand, what I'm hoping for. No pressure, no timeline, just truth. He touched her cheek gently, the gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. Good night, Eleanor. Good night, she whispered, watching as he descended the stairs and disappeared into the cold night. She stood in the hallway for a long time after he left, her hand pressed to the cheek he'd touched, her heart full of conflicting emotions. She cared about Cole. That much was undeniable. Maybe she was even falling in love with him, though the thought still frightened her. But love required trust, required believing that happiness could last, that promises could be kept. And after Luke, after 5 years of broken dreams, that trust felt impossibly fragile. Christmas arrived with a fresh blanket of snow and a peculiar warmth in the air that Martha attributed to a temporary chinook. The boarding house came alive with activity, other residents preparing for travel or small celebrations, Martha cooking enough food to feed an army, and Henry vibrating with barely contained excitement. Eleanor had made him a new shirt from cloth she'd bought with her private tutoring money, and she'd wrapped it carefully along with a primer and a set of colored pencils. They weren't elaborate gifts, but they were given with love, and she hoped that would be enough. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright. Henry woke Eleanor before the sun was fully up, bouncing on her bed and begging her to come see if Santa had visited. Eleanor laughed and allowed herself to be dragged out of bed, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill. Under the tree were the gifts she'd placed there the night before, along with a small stocking Martha had contributed filled with peppermints and walnuts. But there was also a package Eleanor didn't recognize, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine, with Henry written on it in Cole's familiar hand. Can I open them, please? Henry looked at her with pleading eyes. Of course. But let's start with the stocking. That's from Miss Martha. Henry dumped out the contents of the stocking, exclaiming over each treasure. Then he opened Eleanor's gifts, his face lighting up at the new shirt and practically glowing when he saw the colored pencils. These are for real artists, Mama Eleanor. I can draw pictures with all the colors. You certainly can. Now open Mr. Cole's gift. Henry tore into the brown paper with the enthusiasm of childhood, revealing a beautifully carved wooden box. Inside, nestled in cloth, was a small knife with Henry's initials carved into the handle, along with a piece of soft leather and instructions for basic whittling written in Cole's careful script. It's my very own whittling knife. Henry's voice was reverent, just like Mr. Cole's. Can we go show him? Can we go right now? Henry, it's barely sunrise. Mr. Cole is probably still sleeping. No, I'm not. Cole's voice came from the doorway, and Eleanor turned to find him standing there with a shy smile, holding a package of his own. Merry Christmas, Eleanor. She took the package with trembling hands, acutely aware that she had nothing to give him in return. Inside was a beautiful shawl, woven in deep blues and grays, that reminded her of Cole's eyes, soft and warm and clearly expensive. Cole, I can't accept this. It's too much. It's not nearly enough, but it's practical, and I noticed your old shawl was getting threadbare. Please, let me do this. Eleanor wrapped the shawl around her shoulders, feeling the quality of the weave, the warmth it provided. Thank you. It's beautiful. I just wish I had something to give you in return. You've given me more than you know. Cole glanced at Henry, who was examining his knife with careful reverence. You've given me a reason to stay in one place. You've given me something to build toward instead of run from. That's gift enough for any lifetime. Before Eleanor could respond, Henry launched himself at Cole, demanding to know when they could start whittling lessons. Cole laughed and promised they'd begin that very afternoon, after Christmas dinner and church services. The morning dissolved into warmth and laughter, with Martha joining them for coffee and sweet rolls, and even some of the other boarding house residents stopping by to admire Henry's tree and gifts. That evening, after Christmas dinner and church, and an exhausting afternoon of whittling lessons that resulted in several small cuts and one fairly decent attempt at a whistle, Eleanor stood at her window watching snow begin to fall again. Henry was fast asleep in his new bed, the carved one Cole had made, clutching his whittling knife like a talisman. The Christmas tree glowed softly in the lamplight, casting gentle shadows across the room. A soft knock at her door made her turn. Cole stood in the hallway, hat in hand, looking uncertain in a way she rarely saw from him. "I'm sorry to disturb you so late. I just wanted to check that Henry liked his gift." "He loved it. He's been talking about nothing else all day." Eleanor stepped into the hallway, pulling her door partially closed to avoid waking Henry. "Cole, about what you said the other night. You don't have to respond. I meant what I said about no pressure." "Just let me finish." Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to find the right words for what she needed to say. "I'm not ready yet for everything you're offering. My heart is still healing, still learning how to trust again. But I want you to know that I'm working toward it. I'm working toward being brave enough to risk loving someone again." Cole's expression softened. "That's all I needed to hear, that you're working toward it, not running from it. I can wait, Eleanor. I'm good at waiting." "You shouldn't have to wait forever." "Then it's a good thing I'm not planning on it." He smiled, that warm, patient smile that made Eleanor's defenses crumble a little more each time. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here." After he left, Eleanor returned to her window and looked out at the snow-covered prairie. Somewhere out there in a sealed mine shaft in Colorado, Luke Callahan rested in eternal sleep. She would always carry him with her, would always remember what they'd shared. But she was beginning to understand that honoring his memory didn't mean refusing to live fully in the present. Cole wasn't Luke. He didn't make her heart race with wild passion or fill her with desperate longing. What he offered was different, steadier, quieter, built on daily choices and consistent presence. It was the kind of love that would weather storms rather than burn out in spectacular flame. And maybe, Eleanor thought, maybe that was exactly what she needed, what both she and Henry needed. The new year arrived with bitter cold and news that changed everything. Eleanor was preparing lessons one morning when Martha knocked on her door, her face grave. "Eleanor, honey, you need to come downstairs. There's a man here asking questions about Henry. Says he's a relative." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. "What kind of relative?" "Uncle, he claims. Brother to Henry's mother. Says he's been searching for the boy since he heard about his sister's death." Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse, to hide Henry, to claim he wasn't there. But she forced herself to remain calm, to think rationally. If this man truly was Henry's uncle, he had legal rights. The adoption wasn't finalized yet. They were still in the review period. An objection from a blood relative could derail everything. She found the man in Martha's parlor, a thin, weathered individual in his 40s with red-rimmed eyes and work-worn hands. He stood when Eleanor entered, removing his hat awkwardly. "Miss Price? I'm Samuel Morrison. I believe you've been caring for my nephew, Thomas Henry Morrison." Eleanor's mind raced. "How did you find us?" "I heard about my sister's death from the trail boss of that cattle drive. Ran into him up in Wyoming. Took me this long to track down where they'd left the boy. I've been to 6 towns asking after a school teacher caring for an orphan." Morrison twisted his hat in his hands. "I need to see him, ma'am. He's my blood, my sister's boy. I need to see he's all right. He's at school right now. Mr. Morrison, I need to be honest with you. I'm in the process of adopting Henry legally. The papers have been filed with the territorial court." Morrison's face paled. "Adopting him? But ma'am, he's got family. He's got me. I know I'm not much. I work a small ranch up north, barely scraping by, but he's my nephew. My sister would have wanted him with family." Eleanor felt her carefully constructed world beginning to crack. Your sister had months to reach out to family for help. She told the Cowboys there was no one, that Henry had nowhere to go. If you cared so much, why didn't you help her when she needed it? "I didn't know she needed it." Morrison's voice rose with frustration and guilt. "My sister and we had a falling out years ago over her choice of husband. I told her that man would bring her nothing but trouble, and I was right, but that didn't mean I stopped caring. When I heard she'd died, that my nephew was orphaned," his voice broke. "I've got to make this right, Miss Price. I've got to do right by her boy." Before Eleanor could respond, The front door burst open and Henry rushed in, having been dismissed early from school due to the cold. He stopped short when he saw the stranger in the parlor, immediately moving to hide behind Eleanor's skirts. "Henry," Eleanor said gently, "this man says he's your uncle, your mother's brother. Do you remember him?" Henry peered around her skirts, studying Morrison with wary eyes. "Mama talked about Uncle Samuel sometimes. She said you were stubborn and wouldn't help when Daddy got sick." Morrison flinched as if struck. "Is that what she told you? Son, I didn't know your daddy was sick. Your mama and I hadn't spoken in 3 years. If I'd known—" He knelt down, bringing himself to Henry's level. "I would have helped. I would have been there. I'm sorry I wasn't." "I don't know you," Henry said, pressing closer to Eleanor. "I want to stay with Mama Eleanor." The use of the name Mama wasn't lost on Morrison. His expression hardened slightly, and Eleanor saw the determination settling into his features. "Miss Price, I appreciate everything you've done for my nephew, truly, but he belongs with family. I'll be filing an objection to your adoption and petitioning for custody myself." "You can't do that!" Eleanor's voice shook with fury and fear. "Henry is settled here. He's happy. He's thriving. You can't just show up and tear him away from everything he knows." "I can, and I will. He's my blood, and the law favors blood relatives." Morrison stood, replacing his hat. "I'll be staying in town until this is resolved. I'd like to spend some time with Henry, get to know him again. I'm hoping we can work this out reasonably, Miss Price. I don't want to drag this through the courts any more than you do." After Morrison left, Eleanor held Henry while he cried, her own tears falling silently into his hair. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd built, was suddenly in jeopardy. And the worst part was that Morrison might actually have a valid claim. The courts did favor blood relatives, especially male relatives, who could provide a traditional family structure. That evening, Cole found Eleanor sitting alone on the boarding house porch, wrapped in the shawl he'd given her for Christmas, staring at nothing. He sat beside her without speaking, waiting for her to be ready to talk. "He's going to take Henry away from me," she said finally, her voice hollow. "That man, Morrison, he has legal standing as a blood relative. The adoption isn't final. He can object and probably win. Not if we fight it. Not if we show the court that Henry is better off with you." "How?" "I'm an unmarried woman with a teacher's salary. Morrison is family, a man with his own ranch. On paper, he looks like the better choice." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then he said carefully, "There might be a way to strengthen your case." "What way?" "Marry me." Eleanor's head snapped toward him. "What?" "Marry me," Cole repeated, his voice steady but his eyes revealing his nervousness. "If you're a married woman with a husband who can provide additional income and stability, your case becomes much stronger, a 2-parent household versus a bachelor uncle who barely knows the boy. The courts would favor you." "Cole, I can't ask you to marry me just to help me keep Henry. That's not fair to you." "You're not asking. I'm offering." He took her cold hands in his warm ones. "Eleanor, I love you. I've loved you since that first day at the fence when you were so fierce and heartbroken and determined. I was going to wait, give you more time, but circumstances have changed. And I'm not proposing just to help you keep Henry, though that's reason enough. I'm proposing because I want to spend my life with you, because I want to help you raise that boy, because I'm tired of pretending I don't want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my days." Eleanor stared at him, her mind reeling. "Cole, this is too fast. We've only known each other a few months. And in those few months, I've learned more about you than some married couples learn in years. I know you take your coffee with too much sugar and you hum when you're concentrating on lessons. I know you worry about every student like they're your own children, and you never let yourself buy anything frivolous because you're always saving for emergencies. I know you're still healing from losing Luke, and you're terrified of opening your heart again. I know all of it, and I love you anyway. I love you because of it." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face. "But what if I can't love you back the way you deserve? What if all I can ever give you is gratitude and friendship?" "Then I'll take it." Cole's voice was fierce. "Eleanor, I'd rather have a life with you where you're still learning to love me than a life without you at all. And maybe, eventually, gratitude and friendship will grow into something more. Or maybe they won't. But at least we'll have built something together. At least Henry will be safe. Eleanor thought about the fence post where she'd spent 5 years waiting. She thought about Luke, dead in his Colorado mine, and the promises they'd never gotten to keep. She thought about Henry, sleeping upstairs, vulnerable to being taken away by a man he didn't know. And she thought about Cole, patient and steady, and offering her everything without demanding anything in return. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I'll marry you." Cole's expression transformed, joy and relief and love all mixing together. He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time since receiving the news about Luke's death, Eleanor let herself be held, let herself lean on someone else's strength, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be happy again. "We'll need to move quickly," Cole said, his voice muffled against her hair. "File the marriage certificate with the court before Morrison can file his objection. Show them you're in a stable marriage with means to provide for Henry." "Cole?" Eleanor pulled back to look at him. "I need you to understand something. I'm saying yes because I need to protect Henry, yes. But I'm also saying yes because I want to. Because you make me feel safe and seen and valued. I'm not in love with you yet, not the way you deserve, but I could be. I think I'm already on my way there. Is that enough?" "It's more than enough." Cole kissed her forehead gently. "It's everything." They were married 3 days later in Reverend Michaels's church, with Martha and Samuel Morrison the blacksmith as witnesses, and Henry standing between them holding both their hands. Morrison had protested the rushed marriage, claiming it was a transparent attempt to circumvent his custody claim, but the Reverend had refused to delay, seeing two people who'd found each other and a child who desperately needed the stability they could provide together. Eleanor wore her best dress, simple blue calico, and carried wildflowers Martha had somehow found despite the winter season. Cole wore a new shirt and looked terrified and hopeful in equal measure. Henry, pressed into service as a kind of informal ring-bearer, took his duties with utmost seriousness. "Do you, Eleanor Catherine Price, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Eleanor looked at Cole, at his steady gray eyes and patient smile, and thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. From Boston to Kansas, from waiting at fences to standing at altars, from loving a ghost to choosing a man who was vibrantly, wonderfully alive. "I do," she said clearly. "And do you, Cole Henry Barrett, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife with all the same promises and commitments?" "I do," Cole said, his voice rough with emotion. "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Kansas, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Barrett, you may kiss your bride." Cole leaned in and kissed Eleanor softly, reverently, with all the love and patience that had brought them to this moment. It wasn't the passionate, desperate kiss she'd once shared with Luke. It was something different, a promise, a beginning, a choice, made with open eyes and hopeful hearts. When they pulled apart, Henry cheered and threw his arms around both of them, and Eleanor felt something settle into place in her chest. This was her family now, unconventional, hastily assembled, born from loss and necessity and unexpected grace, but family nonetheless. As they left the church, Eleanor glanced back one last time at the woman she'd been, the one who'd stood at fence posts waiting for ghosts. That woman was gone now, transformed by grief and love and the courage it took to choose life over waiting. Ahead, Cole held the door open, Henry danced in the snow, and the rest of Eleanor's life stretched out before her, unknown but no longer frightening. She'd learned that the future couldn't be controlled or predicted, only lived, and she was finally, truly ready to live it.
The marriage changed everything and nothing all at once. Eleanor woke the morning after the wedding in the same room at Martha's boarding house, in the same bed she'd slept in for 3 years, with Henry still snoring softly in his bed across the room. The only difference was the simple gold band on her finger and the knowledge that somewhere in town, Cole was waking up as her husband. They'd agreed to maintain separate rooms for now, to give Henry time to adjust and Eleanor time to grow comfortable with the new reality of being married. It was an unconventional arrangement, but then again, nothing about their relationship had been conventional from the start.
Martha had offered them the largest room in the boarding house once it became available in the spring, one with space enough for all three of them. But for now, they'd continue as they'd been, with the addition of a marriage certificate filed with the territorial court. That certificate was the weapon they needed against Samuel Morrison's custody claim. Cole had delivered it personally to the lawyer in Denver, along with testimonials from Reverend Michaels, Martha, and half a dozen other Silver Creek residents attesting to Eleanor's character and Henry's well-being under her care. The response from Morrison had been swift and bitter. A letter accusing Eleanor of manipulating the situation and Cole of marrying her solely to circumvent proper custody procedures. "Let him accuse," Cole had said when Eleanor showed him Morrison's letter, her hands shaking with anger and fear. "The law is on our side now. You're a married woman with a stable home and community support. Morrison is a bachelor with no relationship to the boy. The court will see that." But Eleanor wasn't so certain. She'd learned over the past years that the law didn't always work the way it should, that justice often favored those with money or connections or simply the right gender. Morrison might be a stranger to Henry, but he was also a man, a blood relative, and someone who could argue that a ranch offered more opportunities than a schoolteacher's modest income. The uncertainty hung over Eleanor like a storm cloud throughout January. She taught her students with half her attention, the other half always listening for news, for a letter from the court, for any indication of how the custody battle would resolve. Henry sensed her anxiety and became clingy, following her around the boarding house, asking repeatedly if Uncle Samuel was going to take him away. "No one's taking you anywhere," Eleanor told him firmly, though her heart hammered with the lie. She couldn't promise that. She couldn't promise anything except that she'd fight with everything she had to keep him. Cole became a constant presence, walking Eleanor to and from school, taking his meals at the boarding house, spending his evenings teaching Henry metalwork, or reading to him from the adventure novels Eleanor had ordered from the general store. He slept in his rented room above the forge, but was at the boarding house so often that even the other residents began treating him as part of the household. He never pushed for more from Eleanor than she was ready to give, never demanded his marital rights or complained about their unusual arrangement. He simply showed up, day after day, solid and dependable as the prairie itself. "You're being very patient," Eleanor said to him one evening. They were sitting on the boarding house porch despite the cold, watching the sun set in shades of pink and gold. Henry was inside with Martha, learning to knit of all things, his small fingers fumbling with needles and yarn. "I married you knowing the circumstances," Cole replied. "I'm not going to suddenly change the terms because I'd like things to move faster. You needed a husband to keep Henry. I wanted to be that husband. We both got what we needed from this arrangement. But what about what you want? What you deserve?" Cole turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious in the fading light. "What I want is to build a life with you and Henry. That takes time. Marriages aren't made in a day or a week or even a month. They're built over years through shared experiences and challenges overcome together. We're building ours now, Eleanor. Every day we're building it." "I wish I could love you the way you love me," Eleanor said quietly. "I wish I could give you what you've given me, that certainty, that wholehearted commitment. You gave me your trust when you agreed to marry me. That's not nothing." Cole reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her cold ones. "Love grows, Eleanor. It's not always a lightning strike. Sometimes it's more like a seed planted in good soil, needing time and care to put down roots." Eleanor squeezed his hand, grateful beyond words for his patience. She knew she cared for him. That much was undeniable. She looked forward to his company, felt safer when he was near, appreciated his kindness to Henry and his steady support. But was that love? Or was it simply gratitude and comfort? She didn't know, and the not knowing made her feel guilty, as if she were cheating Cole out of what he deserved. The letter from the territorial court arrived on a gray morning in mid-February. Eleanor was preparing breakfast when Martha brought it to her, the official seal immediately recognizable. Her hands shook so badly she could barely open the envelope. Cole appeared at her elbow, having sensed something was wrong. "What does it say?" Eleanor scanned the formal language, her heart pounding. Then she read it again, slowly, making sure she understood correctly. "The court has reviewed Morrison's objection and our response. They're scheduling a hearing for next month to determine permanent custody. Both parties are required to appear before Judge Harrison in Denver." That's not a denial, Cole said carefully. It's a chance to present our case. It's also not an approval. It means they're taking his claims seriously. Eleanor felt panic rising in her throat. Cole, what if we lose? What if the judge decides blood relation matters more than Henry's actual well-being? Then we make sure the judge understands exactly how well Henry's doing with us. We bring witnesses, documentation, whatever it takes. Cole's voice was calm but determined. Eleanor, we knew this wasn't going to be easy. Morrison had the right to file an objection, but we have the stronger case. We just need to prove it. The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation. Cole hired the lawyer he'd recommended months ago, a sharp-eyed man named William Carson, who specialized in family law. Carson came to Silver Creek to interview Eleanor, Cole, and Henry, taking copious notes and asking questions that made Eleanor uncomfortable with their directness. Mrs. Barrett, I need to ask you something personal, Carson said during one interview. His spectacles caught the lamplight as he leaned forward. Your marriage to Mr. Barrett was quite sudden, occurring just days before the custody hearing was announced. How do you respond to accusations that this was a marriage of convenience designed solely to strengthen your custody claim? Eleanor felt her cheeks flush. The timing was influenced by Mr. Morrison's appearance, yes, but the feelings behind the marriage were genuine. Cole has been part of Henry's life since the day Henry's mother died. He's been a father to him in all the ways that matter. And your relationship with Mr. Barrett? Is it a true marriage? Eleanor understood what he was really asking. Whether she and Cole shared a bed, whether their marriage was legitimate in the eyes of the law beyond just the certificate. Our marriage is real, Mr. Carson. We're building our life together, getting to know each other as spouses. The physical aspects of marriage take time to develop, particularly given the unusual circumstances of our meeting and the pressure we've been under. Carson made notes, his expression neutral. I ask because Morrison's lawyer will certainly ask. They'll argue that your marriage is a sham, that you're using Mr. Barrett to manipulate the court. We need to be prepared to counter that argument. How? Cole asked, speaking up for the first time. He'd been sitting quietly in the corner, letting Eleanor answer most of the questions. Testimony from witnesses who've observed your relationship, documentation of your living arrangements and plans for the future. And frankly, it would help if you were living together as husband and wife, in fact, not just in name. Separate rooms at a boarding house doesn't look good, regardless of your reasons. Eleanor and Cole exchanged glances. They'd known this was coming, had discussed it late at night when Henry was asleep and Martha had given them privacy in the parlor. The practical reality was that married couples lived together, shared their lives fully. Maintaining separate rooms made their marriage look suspicious, exactly the kind of arrangement Morrison's lawyer would attack. We're planning to move into a house in the spring, Cole said. I've been looking at properties we can afford. Spring might be too late, Carson said bluntly. The hearing is in 3 weeks. If you want to present a strong case, you need to be living as a proper family now. After Carson left, Eleanor and Cole sat in heavy silence. Martha had taken Henry to the general store for candy, giving them time to discuss the lawyer's advice privately. We don't have to do this, Cole said finally. If you're not comfortable, we'll find another way to strengthen the case. What other way? Carson is right. Separate rooms makes our marriage look like a convenient fiction. And maybe it is, in some ways, but it doesn't have to be. Eleanor twisted her wedding ring, feeling its unfamiliar weight. We're married, Cole. Maybe it's time we started acting like it. Eleanor, I don't want you to do anything you're not ready for. I can wait. I know you can. You've proven that. But I'm tired of waiting, tired of letting fear control my choices. Eleanor stood and moved to the window, looking out at Silver Creek's main street. I've spent so many years waiting, waiting for Luke, waiting for answers, waiting to feel ready for life to start again. When does the waiting end? When do I just choose to live? Cole came to stand behind her, close but not touching. Living isn't the same as forcing yourself into something you're not ready for. Maybe I'll never feel completely ready. Maybe readiness is something you create through action, not something that arrives fully formed. Eleanor turned to face him. Move into the boarding house with me. Into our room. With Henry. Be my husband in every sense of the word. Help me be brave enough to build this life we've committed to. Cole searched her face, looking for doubt or hesitation. Are you sure? No, Eleanor admitted. But I'm choosing it anyway. That has to count for something. What followed was a flurry of activity that left Martha both pleased and exasperated. Cole moved his few belongings from the room above the forge into Eleanor's space at the boarding house. They rearranged furniture, creating a sleeping area for Henry that gave him some privacy while allowing Eleanor and Cole to share the large bed Cole had built months ago. It was awkward and strange and terrifying, but it was also oddly right, as if this was what should have happened all along, and they'd simply taken the long way around to get there. The first night, Eleanor lay rigid on her side of the bed, hyper-aware of Cole's presence beside her. He'd been scrupulously respectful, changing in the corner while she used a screen Martha had provided, settling on top of the covers rather than under them, maintaining careful distance between them. You can breathe, you know, Cole said after a long silence, his voice tinged with amusement. I'm not going to attack you in your sleep. Despite her nerves, Eleanor laughed. I know that. I just don't know how to do this, how to be married to someone I'm still getting to know. The same way you do everything else, one day at a time. Come on. 1 hour at a time if necessary. Cole shifted slightly, and Eleanor felt the mattress move beneath his weight. We'll figure it out, Eleanor. There's no rule book, no right way to do this. We'll make it up as we go. What if I'm terrible at being a wife? What if I can't give you what you need? Then we'll work through it together. Marriage isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing each other, day after day, even when it's hard. Cole's voice was gentle in the darkness. I chose you, Eleanor. I choose you now. And I'll choose you tomorrow, and every day after that, regardless of what you can or can't give me. Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks, grateful for the darkness that hid them. I'm going to try to be worthy of that choice. You already are. They fell asleep that way, on opposite sides of the bed, careful not to touch. Two people learning what it meant to share space and life and hope. But sometime in the night, Eleanor reached across the distance between them and found Cole's hand. He wove his fingers through hers, and they slept that way, connected by the smallest gesture of trust. Henry adjusted to the new arrangement with surprising ease. He seemed to understand, on some level, that having Cole fully integrated into their family made them stronger, more legitimate in the eyes of the world that wanted to take him away. He started calling Cole Papa Cole without anyone suggesting it, the name emerging naturally as Cole continued to be present for all the small moments that defined fatherhood, helping with homework, fixing broken toys, enforcing bedtime, doling out praise and discipline in equal measure. The three of them developed routines and rhythms that felt increasingly natural. Cole would wake first, starting the fire and heating water for washing. Eleanor would make breakfast while Cole helped Henry dress and comb his hair. They'd walk to school together, Cole heading to the forge, while Eleanor and Henry disappeared into the classroom. Evenings were spent on lessons and games and the 100 small tasks that filled family life. And nights, Eleanor and Cole would lie in their shared bed, talking in whispers about the day past and the day to come, slowly learning each other's stories, slowly building the foundation of intimacy that true marriage required. Tell me about your brother, Eleanor said one night, about a week into their new living arrangement. The one you spent 10 years searching for. Cole was quiet for so long Eleanor thought he might not answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low and rough with old grief. His name was Matthew. He was 2 years younger than me, wild and impulsive where I was careful and steady. When the war started, our father forbade both of us from enlisting, said the ranch needed us more than the army did. But Matthew couldn't stand it. He was 17 and full of ideals about honor and duty. One night he just left, took his best horse, and headed south to join the Confederate forces. You must have been angry, furious, terrified, guilty that I hadn't stopped him somehow. Cole shifted in the bed, and Eleanor felt him turn toward her. I waited out the war, helped my father keep the ranch running, kept thinking Matthew would come home once it was over, that he'd show up with stories and scars and that same wild grin, but he never did. When did you start searching? After my father died in '68,
The ranch went to me, but I couldn't stand being there without either of them. I sold it and spent the next 10 years following every rumor, every possible lead about Matthew Barrett from Texas. Talked to veterans, checked muster rolls, visited battlefields and hospitals and prisoner camps. Found nothing. It was like he'd just vanished into smoke. Eleanor reached across the darkness and found his hand. When did you finally stop? About a year before I met you. I was in Colorado tracking down yet another Matthew Barrett who turned out to be the wrong person. And I was standing in this saloon looking at this stranger's face, and I just broke. I realized I'd wasted a decade of my life chasing a ghost, that Matthew was probably dead, and I'd never know how or when or where. And I realized that while I'd been searching for him, I'd stopped living my own life. I was 33 years old, and I had nothing, no home, no family, no purpose beyond this futile search. What did you do? I got drunk, if I'm being honest. Spent 3 days feeling sorry for myself. Then I picked myself up, took a job with a cattle drive, and started trying to figure out who Cole Barrett was when he wasn't defined by searching for his brother. Cole squeezed her hand gently. That's why I understood what you were going through when I met you. I saw myself in you, that desperate need to find answers, that conviction that if you just looked hard enough or waited long enough, everything would make sense. I wanted to save you from wasting as many years as I did. You did save me, Eleanor said softly. Not from the waiting. I had to come to that realization myself. But you showed me what it looked like to stop, to choose life over searching. You gave me a blueprint for moving forward. And you gave me a reason to stay still, to put down roots instead of just drifting. Cole brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. Whatever happens at this hearing, whatever the judge decides, you've already given me more than I dreamed of having. A family, a home, a purpose beyond just surviving. Eleanor felt something shift in her chest, a door opening wider, a wall crumbling a bit more. She moved across the bed, closing the distance between them, and rested her head on Cole's shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her, drawing her close, and they lay that way in the darkness, two wounded souls learning to heal together. The day of the custody hearing arrived with unseasonable warmth, the February cold briefly interrupted by Chinook winds that made the snow melt in great rushing streams through Silver Creek streets. Eleanor dressed in her best dress, dark blue with white collar and cuffs, her hair pinned in a neat bun. Cole wore the only suit he owned, brushed clean and pressed by Martha's careful hands. Henry wore his Christmas shirt and new trousers, his hair slicked down with water, his face solemn with the understanding that today was important. They traveled to Denver by train, the journey taking most of the morning. Martha had come along as a witness, as had Reverend Michaels and Sarah Beth Crawford's father, who served as the informal postmaster. They made a small but determined group, united in their conviction that Henry belonged with Eleanor and Cole. The courthouse was an imposing building of red brick and white stone, its halls echoing with the sounds of justice being dispensed in a dozen different rooms. They found the correct courtroom and settled on hard wooden benches to wait. Eleanor's hand gripped tightly in Cole's. Henry pressed against her other side. Samuel Morrison arrived with his own lawyer, a severe woman in black who looked like she'd never smiled in her life. Morrison himself looked nervous and defiant in equal measure, his eyes seeking out Henry with uncomfortable intensity. Henry shrank closer to Eleanor, and she wrapped her arm around him protectively. All rise for the Honorable Judge Thomas Harrison, the bailiff announced, and everyone stood as the judge entered. A man of perhaps 60, with white hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. The hearing began with Morrison's lawyer presenting his case. She was eloquent and persuasive, painting Morrison as a devoted uncle who'd been searching desperately for his nephew, who'd been denied his rightful place in the boy's life by a stranger who'd taken advantage of tragic circumstances. She questioned Morrison's dedication to family, his ownership of a productive ranch, his blood connection to Henry through his deceased sister. Mr. Morrison is prepared to provide young Thomas with a stable home, meaningful work, and the structure that only a male guardian can provide, the lawyer argued. He represents continuity with the boy's past, connection to his mother's memory, and the kind of masculine influence that a child needs to grow into a proper man. Eleanor felt her stomach twist with anxiety. The lawyer was good.
her arguments hitting all the traditional notes about family and gender roles and blood connections. She made Eleanor sound like an interloper, someone who'd swooped in to claim a child that didn't belong to her. Then it was their turn. William Carson stood and methodically dismantled Morrison's case. He called Martha Henderson first, who testified about finding Henry's mother dying, about Eleanor's immediate care for the boy, about the transformation she'd witnessed as Henry went from traumatized orphan to thriving child under Eleanor's guardianship. Mrs. Barrett didn't take advantage of anything, Martha said firmly. She stepped up when no one else would. That boy was alone in the world, and she gave him a home and a mother's love. That counts for something, regardless of blood. Reverend Michaels testified next, speaking eloquently about Eleanor's character, her dedication to her students, her integration into the Silver Creek community. Then came a surprise witness, Dr. Pritchard, who'd treated Henry's mother before she died. The deceased made no mention of any family, Dr. Pritchard testified. I specifically asked if there was anyone we should contact, anyone who could take responsibility for the boy. She said there was no one, that they were alone in the world. If Mr. Morrison was such a devoted uncle, why didn't his sister mention him? Why didn't she ask us to contact him? The question hung in the air, and Eleanor saw Morrison flinch. His lawyer tried to counter, arguing that the estrangement between Morrison and his sister didn't negate his rights, but the damage was done. The judge made notes, his expression thoughtful. Finally, Carson called Henry himself to the stand. Eleanor's heart clenched as her small boy walked forward, was sworn in, and settled into the witness chair with his feet dangling well above the floor. "Henry," Carson said gently, "do you know why we're all here today?" "Yes, sir. Uncle Samuel wants to take me away from Mama Eleanor and Papa Cole." "And how do you feel about that?" Henry's lower lip trembled, but his voice was steady.
"I don't want to go. I don't know Uncle Samuel. Mama Eleanor took care of me when my real mama died. She gave me a home and helped me stop having bad dreams. Papa Cole teaches me things and plays with me and makes Mama Eleanor smile. They're my family now." "What about your uncle? He's your mother's brother. Doesn't that count for something?" "I guess," Henry said uncertainly. "But family isn't just about blood, is it? It's about who takes care of you and loves you and wants you around. Uncle Samuel might be blood, but he doesn't know me. He doesn't know that I like strawberry jam better than grape, or that I'm scared of thunder, or that I'm learning to whittle. Mama Eleanor and Papa Cole know all those things. That makes them my real family." Carson smiled gently. "Thank you, Henry. You can step down now." But before Henry could move, Morrison's lawyer stood. "I have a few questions for the boy, Your Honor." Judge Harrison nodded permission, and the severe woman approached Henry with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Henry, your mother, your real mother, did she ever tell you about your Uncle Samuel?" "Sometimes. She said he was stubborn and didn't like my daddy. But she spoke of him. She remembered him. Doesn't that suggest he was important to her?" Henry frowned, thinking. "I guess, but she also said family wasn't always there when you needed them. She said sometimes strangers turn out to be more family than blood ever was." Morrison's lawyer tried a few more questions, attempting to shake Henry's testimony, but the boy remained steadfast. He wanted to stay with Eleanor and Cole. They were his family now, regardless of blood or legal definitions. Finally, the lawyer gave up and Henry was allowed to step down, rushing immediately back to Eleanor's side. The final witness was Cole himself. He took the stand with quiet confidence, answering Carson's questions about his background, his relationship with Eleanor, his commitment to raising Henry. "Mr. Barrett," Carson asked, "your marriage to Eleanor occurred quite suddenly, shortly after Mr. Morrison appeared claiming custody. Can you explain the timing?" "I can. I'd been planning to propose to Eleanor for months, but I was waiting for her to be ready. She was widowed before we met, lost her first love in tragic circumstances. I knew she needed time to heal, to learn to trust again. When Morrison showed up threatening to take Henry away, it accelerated my timeline. But it didn't change my feelings or my intentions. I married Eleanor because I love her and want to spend my life with her. The timing was influenced by circumstances, but the commitment was genuine." "And your relationship with Henry? Why have you taken such an interest in a child who isn't biologically yours?" Cole's expression softened. "Because he needs a father, and I needed a son. It's that simple. From the day I met Henry, I saw a boy who was hurting and lost and trying so hard to be brave.
I wanted to help him, to give him the stability and love every child deserves. Now I can't imagine my life without him. He's my son in every way that matters. Morrison's lawyer tried to cross-examine, to suggest Cole's motivations were suspicious or that his commitment would fade once the legal battle was over. But Cole remained unshakable, his love for both Eleanor and Henry evident in every word he spoke. Finally, Judge Harrison called for closing arguments. Both lawyers made their cases passionately, Morrison's emphasizing blood ties and traditional family structure, Eleanor's emphasizing actual relationship and demonstrated care. Then the judge called for a recess to deliberate. The waiting was excruciating. Eleanor paced the courthouse hallway, unable to sit still, her mind spinning through every possible outcome. Cole stood watch with Henry, who'd finally succumbed to nervous exhaustion and fallen asleep on a bench, his head in Cole's lap. Martha and the other witnesses gathered nearby, speaking in low tones, offering reassurance that felt hollow in the face of such uncertainty. "Whatever happens," Cole said quietly, when Eleanor finally sank down beside him, "we'll face it together. If the judge rules against us, we'll appeal. We'll fight this as long as it takes. And if we lose the appeal? If Morrison gets permanent custody?" Cole's jaw tightened. "Then we'll stay in Henry's life however we can. We'll write to him, visit if Morrison allows it, make sure he knows we didn't abandon him. We'll fight to stay connected even if we can't keep full custody." Eleanor nodded, trying to find comfort in the words even as her heart broke at the possibility of losing Henry. She'd fought so hard, had changed her entire life for this child. The thought of handing him over to a stranger was unbearable. After nearly 2 hours, the bailiff emerged and called them back into the courtroom. Eleanor's legs felt weak as she walked back inside. Cole's hand steady at her elbow, Henry now awake and pressed against her side. They resumed their seats, and Judge Harrison entered, his expression unreadable. "I've reviewed the testimony and evidence presented by both parties," the judge began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "This is a difficult case, with valid arguments on both sides. Mr. Morrison's blood relationship to the child cannot be dismissed lightly, and his willingness to take responsibility for his nephew speaks to his character. However, blood relationship alone does not determine what's in a child's best interest." Eleanor's heart hammered so hard she could barely hear the judge's next words. The court must consider the child's current well-being, his expressed preferences, and the stability of his living situation. The testimony makes clear that young Henry has thrived under Mrs. Barrett's care. He has formed strong attachments, has a stable home, is receiving education and emotional support. Most significantly, he has clearly expressed his desire to remain with the Barretts. Morrison leaned forward, his face tense, and Eleanor felt Cole's hand tighten on hers. "Mr. Morrison argues that his ranch can provide opportunities that a school teacher's income cannot. However, the court finds that emotional security and existing relationships outweigh potential economic advantages. Furthermore, Mr. Morrison's estrangement from his sister, his absence during her time of need, and his delayed interest in his nephew all weigh against his claim." Judge Harrison paused, looking directly at Henry. "Young man, you spoke eloquently today about what family means. You're right that family is about more than blood. It's about care and commitment and love. The court agrees." Eleanor felt tears spilling down her cheeks as the judge continued. "Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that custody of Thomas Henry Morrison be permanently granted to Eleanor Catherine Barrett and Cole Henry Barrett. The adoption petition is approved in full. Mr. Morrison's objection is denied. Furthermore, given the strength of the child's expressed opposition to contact with Mr. Morrison, the court declines to order any mandatory visitation. If Henry wishes to maintain a relationship with his uncle as he grows older, that will be his choice to make." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through Eleanor's entire body. They'd won. Henry was theirs. Permanently, legally, irrevocably theirs. Morrison stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger and grief. "This is wrong. He's my blood, my sister's boy. You can't just—" "Mr. Morrison," Judge Harrison's voice was stern, "this court's decision is final. You may file an appeal if you wish, but I warn you that the evidence against your claim is substantial. I suggest you accept this outcome with grace and perhaps reflect on why your sister chose not to contact you in her time of need. Morrison stared at Henry for a long moment, his expression a complicated mix of anger and loss and something that might have been regret. Then he turned and left the courtroom without another word, his lawyer hurrying after him. Eleanor pulled Henry into her arms, holding him so tightly he squeaked in protest. Cole wrapped his arms around both of them, and they stood that way in the middle of the courtroom, a family legally recognized and protected, forged through loss and choice and love that had grown in unexpected ways. "Is it really over?" Henry's voice was muffled against Eleanor's dress. "Uncle Samuel can't take me away?" "It's really over," Eleanor managed through her tears. "You're ours forever now, legally and officially ours." "Good," Henry said with the simple certainty of childhood. "Because I didn't want to go anywhere. I like being your son." The journey back to Silver Creek that evening felt dreamlike. Eleanor sat pressed against Cole's side, Henry asleep across both their laps, exhausted from the emotional day. Martha and the other witnesses celebrated quietly in their section of the train car, respecting the family's need for quiet processing of what had just occurred. "We did it," Eleanor whispered to Cole as darkness fell outside the window. "We actually did it." "You did it," Cole corrected gently. "You fought for him from the beginning. You changed your life for him. This victory is yours, Eleanor." "Ours," she insisted. "I couldn't have done it without you. Without this marriage, without your support, the court might have ruled differently." She paused, then added softly, "I married you because I needed to protect Henry. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about necessity and started being about choice, about wanting you in my life, not just needing you." Cole's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Eleanor turned to look at him in the dim light of the train car, seeing the hope and careful restraint in his expression. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from Boston to Kansas, from waiting at fences to standing in courtrooms, from loving a ghost to building a life with a man who'd proven his worth through patience and consistent presence. "I'm saying I think I'm falling in love with you," she said quietly. "Not the desperate, all-consuming love I felt for Luke. Something different. Something that feels more like choosing to be happy than falling into passion. Is that enough? Is that the kind of love you want?" Cole's smile was radiant, even in the darkness. "It's exactly the kind of love I want. The kind that's built on choice and compatibility and shared purpose. The kind that might last." He kissed her forehead gently. "I'll take your growing love and treasure it, Eleanor, and I'll keep earning it every day for the rest of our lives." They arrived back in Silver Creek near midnight to find the town dark and quiet, snow falling gently through the windless air. Cole carried Henry, still sleeping, while Eleanor and Martha gathered their bags. The boarding house was warm and welcoming, and Martha immediately set about making tea despite the late hour. "I'll give you 3 the large rooms starting tomorrow," Martha announced. "No arguments. You're a proper family now. You need proper space. And I'm raising your rent appropriately," she added with a smile that took the sting from the words. "Thank you, Martha." Eleanor hugged the older woman tightly. "For everything, for believing in us, for testifying, for being the family I needed when I first came to Kansas." "Nonsense. You'd have done the same for me." Martha shooed them toward their current room. "Now get that boy to bed properly. Tomorrow you can start figuring out what your new life looks like." That night, with Henry tucked safely in his bed and the lamp turned low, Eleanor and Cole lay together in their shared bed. Not on opposite sides this time, but close, touching, connected. Eleanor rested her head on Cole's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, feeling safer and more at peace than she had in years. "Cole?" she said softly into the darkness. "Thank you for coming back. That day when you rode back to Silver Creek after the cattle drive left, when you decided to stay. Thank you for choosing us before we even knew we needed you." Cole's hand traced gentle patterns on her back. "I think maybe we all needed each other. You needed someone to help you stop waiting. Henry needed parents who'd fight for him. And I needed a reason to believe in permanence again, to trust that staying could be better than running. Did you find it? That reason?" "I found more than that. I found home. Cole kissed the top of her head. After 15 years of drifting, of never belonging anywhere, I finally found where I'm supposed to be. Right here, with you and Henry, building something that'll outlast us both. Eleanor felt the truth of his words settle into her bones. She'd spent 5 years looking backward, waiting for a promise that could never be fulfilled. But the future had arrived anyway, in the form of a patient cowboy and an orphaned boy, offering her a second chance she hadn't known she needed. Life rarely looked like the dreams people carried in their hearts. Sometimes it looked better. Outside, snow continued to fall on Silver Creek, blanketing the prairie in white, covering the old fence post where Eleanor used to wait. She thought briefly of Luke resting in his Colorado grave and sent him a silent blessing. He'd given her the courage to leave Boston, to seek something more than the life she'd been born into. Without him, she never would have come west, never would have been in Silver Creek when Henry and Cole needed her. Everything had led to this moment, the losses and the waiting, the grief and the gradual healing, the choice to open her heart again despite the risks. Eleanor closed her eyes, listening to Cole's steady breathing and Henry's soft snores from across the room, and felt gratitude wash over her. This was her family now. This was her life. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Spring arrived in Kansas with a violence that matched its beauty. Thunderstorms that shook the boarding house walls, winds that bent the prairie grass nearly horizontal, and wildflowers that erupted across the landscape in riots of color. Eleanor stood at the window of their new, larger room, watching lightning fracture the sky, one hand resting on the swell of her belly where new life grew, the other holding back the curtain Martha had sewn for them. "Storm's getting closer," Cole said from behind her, his voice warm with concern. "Should I wake Henry? You know how he gets when the thunder's loud." "Let him sleep while he can. He'll wake on his own soon enough." Eleanor turned from the window to face her husband, still sometimes surprised by the tenderness she felt when she looked at him. 4 months had passed since the custody hearing, 4 months of learning what it meant to be truly married, to build a life with intention rather than desperation. "Besides, I think this one might sleep through anything. He was exhausted after helping you at the forge all day." Cole smiled, that slow, warm expression that never failed to make Eleanor's heart lift. "He's getting good with the metalwork, got a real feel for it. Give him a few more years and he could apprentice properly if he wants." "A few more years," Eleanor repeated softly, marveling at the phrase. A few more years implied permanence, implied a future that stretched out predictably and safely. Once she'd thought her future would be with Luke on a Kansas homestead, then she'd thought she had no future at all, and now here she was with a different man, a different life, and happiness that felt more real than any dream she'd once harbored. Thunder cracked so loud it rattled the window panes, and sure enough, Henry's small voice called out from his bed in the corner. "Mama? Papa?" Eleanor crossed to him, easing herself down onto the edge of his bed, a more difficult maneuver now that she was 5 months along. "We're here, sweetheart. Just a spring storm. It'll pass." Henry sat up, his hair sticking up in all directions, his eyes wide with residual fear. At 8 years old, he was losing some of his little boy softness, growing lean and tall like Cole. But storms still frightened him, probably always would after losing his birth mother on a similar night. "Can I stay with you until it's over?" "Of course." Cole appeared with a quilt and helped Henry settle between them in the larger bed, the 3 of them, soon to be 4, huddled together while the storm raged outside. These moments had become Eleanor's favorite, the simple domestic intimacy of family weathering small crises together. This was what she'd traveled west seeking, though she hadn't known it at the time. Not adventure or fortune, but belonging. "Papa, tell me again about the ranch," Henry said, his voice muffled against Cole's shoulder. "The one we're going to build." Cole had been saving every spare penny from his forge work, and Eleanor had added her teaching salary and the income from private students. Together, they'd managed to accumulate enough for a down payment on land, 20 acres just north of Silver Creek, with a creek running through it and soil that old-timers swore was perfect for growing. Cole had already started clearing timber for a house, working on weekends with help from men in town who'd grown fond of the transplanted Easterner who'd proven herself tougher than she looked. "Well, it'll have a big kitchen for your mama," Cole began, launching into the description he'd crafted and refined over dozens of tellings, with windows facing east so she can see the sunrise while she makes breakfast,
and a bedroom for you with space for all those books you keep collecting, and a workshop attached to the house where I can do metalwork during the winter when it's too cold to work outside. And a room for the baby, Henry added. This was his favorite part of the description, the proof that he was going to be a big brother, that his family was growing rather than shrinking. With a cradle Papa's going to build and a rocking chair for Mama. That's right, and a porch that wraps around two sides of the house, where we can sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. Cole's voice was soft with longing and determination. It won't be fancy, not at first, but it'll be ours, built with our own hands, on our own land. That means something. Eleanor listened to her husband describe their future home and felt emotion swell in her chest. She'd once planned a life with Luke that would have looked similar. A homestead, children, the hard work of building something from nothing. But this was different. This wasn't a dream sustained by letters and longing. This was real, built on daily choices and shared labor and love that had grown from tentative beginnings into something solid and enduring. The storm eventually passed, leaving the air clean and fresh and cool. Henry drifted back to sleep between them, and Eleanor lay awake listening to her two boys breathe, her hand on her belly, where she could feel the baby moving and felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "You're crying," Cole whispered, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. That's why I'm crying." Eleanor squeezed his fingers. "I'm just thinking about how different my life is from what I imagined. How I came to Kansas looking for one thing and found something completely different, something better." "Better than what you had with Luke?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. Cole rarely mentioned Luke, but she knew her first love remained a complicated presence in their marriage. Not a rival exactly, but a ghost that occasionally needed acknowledging. "Different from what I had with Luke," she said finally. "Not better or worse, just different. What Luke and I had was beautiful and intense and ultimately impossible. What you and I have is sustainable. It's built to last. Does that make sense?" "It does." Cole shifted closer, his arm coming around her carefully, mindful of her changing body. "I never wanted to replace him, you know. I just wanted to be enough on my own terms." "You are. You're more than enough." Eleanor turned her head to kiss him, this man who'd waited so patiently for her heart to catch up with her head. "I love you, Cole Barrett. Not because you helped me keep Henry, not because you were convenient, or because I was grateful. I love you because of who you are, steady and kind, and brave enough to love someone who is still learning how to love back." "Eleanor," Cole's voice was rough with emotion. "Let me finish. I need to say this." Eleanor took a breath. "For 5 years, I stood at that fence waiting for a man who couldn't come back. And I told myself that waiting was the same as loving, that loyalty meant refusing to move forward. But you taught me something important. You taught me that real love isn't passive, it's active. It's choosing someone every day, showing up for them, building something together. You loved me actively, patiently, without demanding anything I wasn't ready to give. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love with that steadiness, that certainty. I fell in love with you." Cole kissed her then, deep and thorough, and full of everything words couldn't express. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Henry was stirring between them, mumbling sleepily about people kissing too loud. They laughed and settled back down, the three of them tangled together, and Eleanor felt the last remaining wall around her heart crumble completely. She was done protecting herself from loss, done holding back pieces of herself in case the worst happened. She was all in now, fully committed to this life and this family, and this man who'd proven himself worthy of her trust. The next few months passed in a blur of activity. Cole worked on the house whenever he could spare time from the forge, and on weekends the whole town seemed to turn out to help. Walls went up, a roof was raised, windows were fitted into frames. Eleanor taught through the end of the school year, her belly growing larger until the students started taking bets on whether the baby would arrive before summer vacation. "I've got my money on a boy," Sarah Beth Crawford announced one afternoon. She was 14 now, Eleanor's teaching assistant and a young woman of firm opinions. "You're carrying low and you've got that glow they talk about." "And I say girl," Tommy Morrison countered. He was Samuel Morrison's nephew only in name now. He'd taken to signing his schoolwork Tommy Barrett,
and no one had the heart to correct him. Because Mama needs another girl in the family to balance out me and Papa and the baby brother I'm definitely getting. Henry, who'd been practicing his sums at the board, turned around with exaggerated patience. For the 100th time, Tommy, we're not related just because we have the same last name. And nobody knows if the baby's a boy or girl yet. But you want a brother, right? Tommy pressed. Someone to play with and teach stuff to? Henry's face softened. Yeah, I guess that'd be nice. But a sister would be okay too. As long as the baby's healthy and Mama's okay, I don't care what we get. Eleanor felt her throat tighten with pride. Her boy, and he was fully hers now, the adoption finalized and his last name legally changed to Barrett, had grown so much over the past year. The traumatized orphan who'd barely spoken was now confident and articulate, secure in his place in the world. That transformation alone made every hardship worthwhile. The house was finished in early June, just as the prairie heat became oppressive. It wasn't large, 4 rooms and a porch, but it was sturdy and well-built and entirely theirs. Cole had carved their names into the lintel above the front door, Eleanor, Cole, and Henry Barrett, 1878, and left space for more names to be added as the family grew. Moving day was chaos. Martha cried and fussed and gave them half her kitchen supplies as a housewarming gift. The boarding house residents helped load their meager belongings into a wagon Cole had borrowed. Reverend Michaels blessed the house with a prayer that made Eleanor cry. And by nightfall, they were settled into their new home, exhausted and happy, and finally, truly independent. It's perfect, Eleanor said that evening. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, just as Cole had described months ago. Henry was inside arranging his books on the shelves Cole had built into the wall of his room. The baby kicked actively under Eleanor's ribs, as if celebrating the new space. Everything about this is perfect. Wait until winter when the wind comes through every crack and you're cursing me for not thinking about insulation, Cole said wryly. But he was smiling, his arm around Eleanor's shoulders, looking at his land and his home with satisfaction that went bone deep. But yeah, it's pretty good. It's a start anyway. It's more than a start. It's proof. Eleanor leaned into his warmth. Proof that we can build something lasting. Proof that I was wrong to think happiness only came once in a lifetime. Proof that love can look different and still be real. Speaking of proof, Cole said slowly, I have something I've been meaning to give you. I was waiting for the right moment, and I think this might be it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. This was my mother's. My father gave it to me before he died, said I should give it to the woman I married. I know you already have a wedding ring, but I thought I wanted you to have something that connected you to my family, to my history. Eleanor unwrapped the cloth to reveal a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. Inside were 2 tiny portraits, a young woman and a small boy. Your mother and Matthew, she said softly, recognizing the resemblance in the boy's features. Yeah, it's all I have left of them. And I want you to have it, to add to it if you want. Maybe put a picture of our baby inside, or Henry, or whatever feels right to you. I just wanted you to know that you're not just my wife. You're my family in the deepest sense. You're part of everything I am, everything I was, everything I hope to be. Eleanor clasped the locket around her neck, feeling the weight of it settle against her skin. Thank you. I'll treasure it. And Cole, I want you to know something too. That fence post where I used to wait, I haven't been back there since we got married. Not once. I don't need to anymore. I'm not waiting for anything now. I'm living. Cole's smile was radiant in the fading light. Good. Because I'd hate to think you were still pining for another man while I'm sitting right here adoring you. Not pining, just remembering occasionally, and being grateful. Eleanor shifted to look at him directly. Luke brought me to Kansas, but you made me want to stay. He gave me a dream, but you gave me reality. And reality, it turns out, is so much better than any dream I could have imagined. They sat that way until full dark, talking about nothing and everything, making plans and sharing hopes, being together in the comfortable silence of 2 people who knew each other's stories and loved each other anyway. Eventually, Henry came out and wedged himself between them, and they rearranged to accommodate him, the 3 of them watching fireflies appear in the darkness, marking out their small corner of the vast prairie. Labor came on a hot July night with startling intensity.
Eleanor woke to cramping pain and her water breaking, soaking the sheets before she could fully process what was happening. Cole, who'd been sleeping lightly these past weeks, was up immediately, lighting lamps and helping Eleanor into the rocking chair while he sent Henry running to town for the midwife. "It's too soon," Eleanor gasped between contractions. "The baby isn't due for another 3 weeks." "Babies come when they're ready, not when we expect them," Cole said with a calmness he clearly didn't feel. His hands shook as he helped Eleanor out of her wet nightgown and into a clean one, as he boiled water and gathered the supplies the midwife had told them to prepare. "Just breathe. Henry will be back with Mrs. Anderson soon. She's delivered half the babies in Silver Creek." "You're in good hands." But the contractions were coming hard and fast, and Eleanor felt fear spike through the pain. Something was different about this labor, something urgent and almost violent in how quickly it was progressing. "Cole, I don't think we have time to wait for the midwife." Cole's face went pale. "Eleanor, I don't know how to." "You're going to have to figure it out." Eleanor gripped his hand so hard her knuckles went white. "This baby is coming now. I can feel it." What followed was simultaneously the longest and shortest hour of Eleanor's life. Cole, forced by necessity into the role of midwife, did his best to remember everything Mrs. Anderson had told them during her prenatal visits. Eleanor pushed and screamed and cursed and prayed, and Cole stayed with her through all of it, his steady presence the only thing keeping her tethered to sanity as pain threatened to drown her. And then, just as false dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky, a baby's cry split the air, thin and indignant and absolutely beautiful. "It's a girl," Cole said, his voice shaking with emotion and relief as he placed the tiny, squirming infant on Eleanor's chest. "We have a daughter, Eleanor. She's perfect. She's absolutely perfect." Eleanor looked down at the baby, red-faced and furious, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that suggested she'd have no trouble making her needs known, and felt love crash over her like a physical force. This was her daughter, hers and Cole's. Proof of their love, evidence of their future, a new chapter in a story she'd once thought was already written. Mrs. Anderson arrived 20 minutes later with Henry in tow, both of them breathless from running. The midwife immediately took over, examining Eleanor and the baby, cleaning up, providing the professional care that had been absent during the actual delivery. But the critical part was over. Mother and baby were both healthy, if exhausted. "You did good, Mrs. Barrett," Mrs. Anderson said approvingly. "And you too, Mr. Barrett. Not many men could have kept their heads in that situation. Your daughter is small but sturdy. She'll thrive." Henry crept closer, his eyes huge as he looked at his new sister. "She's so tiny. Is she supposed to be that small?" "She'll grow," Cole assured him, one arm around Henry's shoulders, the other reaching out to gently touch the baby's soft cheek. "You were this small once, too. Hard to believe, I know." "Can I hold her?" Henry's voice was reverent, awed. Eleanor shifted carefully, allowing Henry to sit beside her on the bed. Together they positioned the baby in his arms, showing him how to support her head, how to cradle her securely. Henry stared down at his sister with an expression of fierce protectiveness that made Eleanor's eyes fill with tears. "I'm going to teach her everything," Henry declared. "How to read and do sums and whittle and everything else. And I'm going to make sure nobody ever hurts her or makes her sad. That's what big brothers do, right, Papa?" "That's exactly what big brothers do," Cole confirmed, his own voice suspiciously rough. "She's lucky to have you." They named her Rose Catherine Barrett, Rose for the wild roses that grew along the creek on their property, Catherine for Eleanor's middle name, and her mother back in Boston, who Eleanor wrote to occasionally now, rebuilding bridges she'd burned when she fled east. Rose was tiny but determined, nursing fiercely and sleeping in short bursts, demanding attention from all of them and getting it gladly. The first few weeks were exhausting, all of them adjusting to the rhythms of life with an infant. Eleanor, who'd worried about her ability to mother a newborn after coming to Henry when he was already 7, discovered that maternal instinct needed no prior experience. She knew how to soothe Rose's cries, how to read her different whimpers, how to find joy in the small milestones of infant development. Cole proved himself an involved and devoted father, walking the floor with Rose when she was fussy,
changing diapers without complaint, marveling aloud at her tiny fingers and toes. And Henry was endlessly fascinated by his sister, constantly wanting to hold her, or sing to her, or show her things she was far too young to appreciate. "She smiled at me," Henry would announce triumphantly, though Eleanor and Cole both knew it was likely just gas. "I think she knows my voice already," he'd insist. "See how she turns her head when I talk?" They didn't have the heart to dampen his enthusiasm, and truthfully, Rose did seem to respond to her brother's attention. By 2 months old, she was genuinely smiling, and Henry's face was often the one that delighted her most. Summer faded into autumn, and life on the small ranch settled into comfortable patterns. Cole worked at the forge 3 days a week and spent the other days improving their property, building a proper barn, fencing pasture for the milk cow and chickens they'd acquired, planting fruit trees that would bear in future years. Eleanor, with Rose strapped to her chest in a sling Martha had made, tended the vegetable garden and prepared for the new school year, which would begin in September. She'd negotiated with the school board to teach from home 3 days a week, with her more advanced students coming to the ranch for lessons, while the younger children attended a new teacher who'd been hired to replace her at the town schoolhouse. It was an unusual arrangement, but Eleanor's reputation as an excellent teacher and the difficulty of finding qualified educators on the frontier had worked in her favor. She could continue teaching while staying close to Rose, and the additional income would help as they built their homestead. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual that had become sacred to all of them, Henry asked a question that had clearly been troubling him. "Mama, do you ever think about my first mama, the one who died?" Eleanor felt Cole tense beside her, but she kept her voice calm and gentle. "I think about her sometimes, yes. I think about how brave she was, trying to get you to safety even when she was sick. I think about how much she must have loved you. Do you think she'd be mad that I call you Mama now instead of her?" "Oh, sweetheart, no." Eleanor set Rose in her cradle. Cole had carved it from oak, just as he'd promised, and pulled Henry close. "I think she'd be grateful. I think she'd be so happy knowing you found a family who loves you and keeps you safe. Love isn't something that runs out, Henry. You can love your first mama's memory and love me too. There's room for both. Like how you loved Mr. Luke and now you love Papa?" Eleanor glanced at Cole, surprised Henry knew about Luke. They'd never explicitly discussed her first love with him. "How do you know about Luke?" "I heard Miss Martha talking about it once, about how you waited for him and he died, and how Papa helped you stop being sad." Henry looked between them seriously. "Is it okay that you love Papa now instead of Mr. Luke?" "I love Papa now along with the memory of Luke," Eleanor corrected gently. "Just like you love me along with the memory of your first mama. People's hearts are bigger than we think. They can hold more love than we imagine possible." Cole spoke up, his voice soft. "Henry, I never met Luke Callahan, but I think if I had, we might have been friends. Because he loved your mama enough to want her to be happy, even if he couldn't be the one to make her happy. And I'd like to think he'd be glad she found someone to share her life with after he was gone." Henry considered this, his face scrunched in concentration. "So it's okay to love new people even when you still miss old people?" "It's not just okay," Eleanor said. "It's what we're supposed to do. The people we lose would want us to keep loving, keep living, keep opening our hearts even when it's scary. That's how we honor their memory, by not letting loss make us stop living." "Then I'm going to remember my first mama and love you and Papa and Rose all together," Henry declared, "because that's what big hearts do." After he went to bed that night, Eleanor stood at the cradle watching Rose sleep, her tiny fists curled beside her face, her expression peaceful in the lamplight. Cole came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "That was a good conversation," he said quietly. "Important." He needed to hear it. We all needed to hear it, I think. Eleanor leaned back against Cole's chest. "I spent so long thinking that loving you meant betraying Luke. But Henry's right. Hearts are bigger than we think. There's room for all of it, the grief and the joy, the past and the present, the people we've lost and the people we've found." "Do you still miss him, Luke?" Eleanor thought about it honestly. "Sometimes. Mostly I miss who I was when I was with him,
young and certain and full of dreams that seemed so simple then, but I don't wish things had turned out differently. If Luke had lived, if I'd built a life with him, I wouldn't have Henry. I wouldn't have Rose. I wouldn't have you. And I can't imagine my life without any of you now. Even though this isn't the life you planned? Especially because this isn't the life I planned. Eleanor turned in his arms to face him. The life I planned was based on a girl's dreams and a boy's promises. This life is based on real people making real choices. It's messier and harder and more complicated than anything I imagined, but it's also richer and deeper and more beautiful. I wouldn't trade it for anything. Cole kissed her then, tender and thorough, and Eleanor kissed him back with all the love she'd learned to feel, all the trust she'd learned to give. When they finally pulled apart, Rose was stirring, making the soft grunting sounds that preceded her demands for feeding. "I'll get her," Cole said, moving to lift the baby from her cradle. "You've been up since dawn. Sit down. Rest a minute." Eleanor watched her husband walk their daughter around the room, bouncing gently, murmuring nonsense in the voice he reserved for babies, and felt profound gratitude for this life she'd stumbled into. She thought about the Eleanor who'd stood at fence posts waiting for a man who would never come, and she wanted to reach back through time and tell that woman it would be okay. That loss wasn't the end of the story, that happiness could come again, different but just as real, just as worthy. The seasons turned. Autumn brought harvest and preparations for winter. Cole built a larger workshop and began taking on more complicated forge projects, his reputation for quality work spreading throughout the region. Eleanor's home school thrived, with several students making the journey to the ranch 3 times a week for lessons that were considered superior to what the town school offered. Rose grew from tiny infant to chubby baby, rolling over and then sitting up and finally crawling at 9 months, getting into everything and delighting them all with her determination. And Henry continued to blossom, growing taller and more confident, excelling at his studies and his metalwork apprenticeship with Cole. He rarely mentioned Uncle Samuel Morrison anymore. The man had left Kansas entirely, Eleanor had heard, heading west to Oregon Territory to start fresh. The custody battle had become just another piece of history, important but not defining. Winter arrived hard and cold, testing the house's construction and their preparations. But they weathered it together, the 4 of them cozy in their small home, the stove radiating heat, lanterns casting warm light, love making even the hardest days bearable. Eleanor taught lessons while Rose napped. Cole worked in his shop when weather permitted. Henry did his schoolwork and helped with chores and played with his sister, who adored him with single-minded devotion. On Christmas Eve, they attended services at Reverend Michael's church, Rose bundled in blankets and making happy sounds at all the candlelight. The whole town was there, and afterward people kept stopping Eleanor and Cole to admire the baby and comment on how much Henry had grown and generally treat them like the respectable family they'd become. "You've done well for yourself," Martha said, appearing at Eleanor's elbow as they prepared to leave. "That little girl who arrived in Silver Creek, all heartbroken and determined. Look what she built." "I had help," Eleanor said, smiling at Cole across the room, where he was showing Rose to Mrs. Crawford. "A lot of help. That's how it's supposed to work. Nobody builds a life alone." Martha patted her arm. "Your Luke would be proud, you know, of how you survived losing him, of how you found happiness again. That takes courage." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. She still kept Luke's letters in a box under her bed, still thought of him sometimes when she saw the fence post on the edge of their property. But the sharp edge of grief had dulled completely now, worn smooth by time and new love and the daily acts of living. Luke was part of her history, but he wasn't her present. He wasn't her future. "Thank you, Martha, for everything. For taking me in when I first arrived, for believing in me, for being family when I needed it most." "Families aren't just blood," Martha said firmly. "You taught me that, watching you with Henry. Families are the people who choose each other, who show up for each other, who build something together that's stronger than what any individual could create alone." That night, after Henry was asleep and Rose was in her cradle, Eleanor and Cole stood on their porch, looking out at their land covered in fresh snow. The fence post was visible in the moonlight, a dark silhouette against the white landscape. "I should probably pull that post up," Cole said quietly. "Use the wood for something else. It serves no purpose anymore."
No, Eleanor said quickly. Leave it. It's a reminder. Of what? Of where I was and how far I've come. Of the woman who waited and the woman I became. Of the fact that sometimes we have to lose one dream to find a better one. Eleanor took Cole's hand. Besides, maybe someday Henry or Rose will ask about it, and we can tell them the whole story, about Luke and the waiting and how you came riding into town and changed everything. That's a long story. We've got time. Eleanor squeezed his hand. We've got all the time in the world. Cole pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and they stood that way in the cold winter night, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, who'd built something real and lasting from the ruins of loss and the courage of hope. I love you, Cole said into her hair. I'll never get tired of saying that. Good, because I'll never get tired of hearing it. Eleanor tilted her face up for a kiss. I love you too, so much more than I ever thought I could love again. Inside, Rose started crying, her hungry cry, impossible to ignore. They laughed and went inside together, returning to the warm circle of lamplight and family, to the ordinary miracles of feeding babies and stoking fires and being together. The fence post stood alone on the edge of their property, marking the spot where Eleanor had once waited for a future that would never arrive. But that woman was gone now, transformed by grief and love, and the courage it took to choose life over waiting. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, more complete, a woman who'd learned that happy endings rarely looked like the ones you imagined, but that didn't make them any less real. Eleanor Price Barrett was done waiting. She was living fully, loving deeply, building a legacy that would outlast her. And every evening when the sun set over their small ranch, painting the Kansas sky in shades of gold and crimson, she stood on her porch with her husband beside her and her children safe inside and felt grateful for the journey that had brought her here. The prairie wind still whispered secrets as it always had, but Eleanor wasn't listening for messages from the past anymore. She was too busy creating the present, building the future, loving the family that had become her home. And in the spring, when wildflowers bloomed across their land in riots of color, Cole did something Eleanor would treasure forever. He built a small bench beside the old fence post with a brass plaque that read, "For Eleanor, who waited with hope and found love in unexpected places." She cried when she saw it, and Cole held her while she wept for the girl she'd been and the woman she'd become and the grace that had carried her from one to the other. And then they sat on that bench together, watching their children play in the prairie grass, and talked about the dreams they were building together. The larger house they'd add to in a few years, the horses Cole wanted to raise, the school Eleanor hoped to establish that would serve the growing community, the family that would expand and change, but always remain rooted in the choice they'd made to love each other. That fence post and its bench became a landmark on their property, a place where Eleanor would sit when she needed to think or remember or simply breathe. Sometimes she'd read Luke's old letters there, honoring the memory of what had been. But more often she'd sit with Cole or watch Henry teach Rose to identify prairie flowers, or simply absorb the peace of knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Years later, when Rose was old enough to ask questions and Henry was nearly grown, they would gather at that fence post and Eleanor would tell them the whole story. About Luke and the waiting, about Cole's patience and Henry's arrival, about custody battles and unexpected love, and the way life never turned out quite like you planned, but sometimes turned out better. "So the fence post is where it all started?" Rose would ask, her dark eyes, so like Cole's, wide with interest. "No," Eleanor would say, pulling her daughter close. "The fence post is where the waiting ended and the living began. That's much more important." And Cole would smile at her across the children's heads, that warm, steady smile that had become as familiar as breathing, and Eleanor would smile back, grateful beyond words for the journey that had brought her from heartbreak to wholeness, from waiting to living, from lost to found. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, just as it always had. But Eleanor Barrett wasn't looking at the horizon anymore, searching for something that would never arrive. She was looking at the life surrounding her, messy and real and more beautiful than any dream, and finding it exactly enough. She was home. Finally, truly, completely home. And she would never stand at fences waiting again.